Hello and welcome. I am happy you are here for this story tonight. This is a place for rest. Find a comfortable position. Let your body feel heavy and safe. We are going to begin a long story. It is a simple story, made for you to listen to as you drift away. There is no need to follow every word. Your mind can wander. Just let the sound of my voice be a gentle anchor, a soft rhythm in the quiet of your room. Tonight, our story is called The Postcard Train. Let us begin. Chapter 1. The Journey to Port Blossom. Clara's world was a world of paper and quiet. She worked in a library, but not the front part of the library where people came and went, where voices whispered and computers beeped. She worked in the back, in a room that smelled of old glue and aging paper and the faint, dry scent of dust. Her job was to organize old books that had not been touched in many years. She would take a book from a tall metal shelf, open it carefully, and read the card inside. The card told her where the book belonged. She would then carry the book to its proper place, slide it between two other old books, and the task was done. She did this all day. Her movements were slow and deliberate. The only sounds were the soft slide of her shoes on the polished floor, the gentle whisper of a page turning, the quiet thud of a book being placed on a shelf. The light in the room came from high windows, and in the afternoon, long bars of sunlight would cut through the dusty air, making the tiny particles of dust dance like little stars. Clara found a deep comfort in this order. She knew every shelf, every section. Her life was like the books, neatly ordered, each day following the one before it in a predictable, calm sequence. She lived in a small apartment a short walk from the library. It was a clean place, with few things in it. A bed, a table, a chair, a small kitchen. In the evenings, she would make a simple meal, perhaps some soup or some toast. She would eat at the table, looking out her window at the brick wall of the building next door. She did not feel lonely. She felt contained. Her life was a small, neat box, and she was safe inside it. She did not have many friends. The people at the library were kind, but they were colleagues. They would say hello in the morning and goodbye in the evening. Clara's great-aunt was a woman she hardly remembered. She had met her only a few times as a small child. The great-aunt was a traveler. That was the one thing everyone in the family said about her. She was always going somewhere, always sending strange postcards from places with names Clara could not pronounce. Then the postcards stopped. Clara heard that her great-aunt had passed away peacefully in a small house by the sea. Clara felt a brief, distant sadness, the kind of sadness you feel for a story that has ended. One Tuesday, a day like any other Tuesday, a small package arrived for her. The mail was usually just bills or advertisements, but this was a box. It was small and square, wrapped in plain brown paper. Her name and address were written on it in beautiful, flowing handwriting. Clara took the box inside her apartment. She placed it on her small table. For a long time, she just looked at it. It was a question mark, sitting in the middle of a sentence that had been finished long ago. The box was made of a dark, smooth wood. It had no lock, just a simple lid. She lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of faded blue velvet, was a stack of postcards. There was no letter, no explanation, just the postcards. She lifted the first one out. It was not a printed postcard. A beautiful, detailed painting of a tall, white lighthouse on a green cliff. The sea behind it was a deep blue, with little white lines for the waves. The painting was simple, but it felt real. She could almost smell the sea air and hear the cry of the gulls. Instead, a single train ticket was neatly glued to the card. It was a simple ticket, with a starting point of Central Station, the main station in her city, but no destination. The word was salt. Clara looked through the rest of the postcards. There were 10 in total. Each one was a painting of a different place. One showed an old stone bridge arching over a fast-moving river, with misty mountains behind it. Another showed a narrow yellow house with a balcony full of red flowers, sitting next to a green canal. Another showed a huge ancient oak tree, its branches spreading wide. Another showed a quiet courtyard at night, with a simple stone fountain and a sky full of stars. Each postcard was a tiny, perfect world, and on the back of each one was a train ticket and a single, cryptic word. Clara sat at her table for hours. The 10 postcards spread out before her. The sun went down, and her small apartment grew dark, but she did not turn on the light. The postcards seemed to glow in the dimness. They were a map to a world she did not know. They were an invitation. A pull began to grow inside her, a feeling she had never experienced before. It was not a loud feeling. It was a quiet, deep pull, like the tide. Her life in the library, her neat apartment, her ordered days suddenly felt not safe, but small. It was an answer to a question she had not even known she was asking. The next morning, Clara woke up before her alarm. The feeling was still there, stronger now in the morning light. She did not think, she acted. She took a small, soft bag from the top of her closet. She packed a few simple clothes, a pair of sturdy shoes, a warm sweater, a toothbrush. She looked around her apartment. She looked at the chair, the table, the bed. They were just things. They were not her life. Her life was what she did, and she was about to do something new. She wrote a short, simple note for the library, saying she had to leave. She left it on the kitchen table with her keys. She did not know if she would ever come back. She did not think about it. She closed the door to her apartment behind her, the click of the lock loud in the morning quiet. She walked through the familiar streets of her city, but everything looked different. She was not just walking to the library, she was walking away. She walked all the way to Central Station. The station was huge and loud. The sounds of announcements, rolling suitcases. It was the opposite of her quiet room in the library. But she was not afraid. She felt a strange sense of calm. She held her bag close. Inside it was the first postcard, the one with the lighthouse and the word salt. Inside it was the first ticket. Her journey was beginning. Clara walked through the great hall of the station, her eyes looking up at the giant board where the train times were listed. The board clicked and clattered as the letters and numbers flipped over, changing destinations, changing lives. She did not need to look at the board. Her ticket was an open ticket. It was for any train leaving that day. She felt a deep sense of freedom in that. She found a quiet bench to sit on, away from the main rush of people. She opened her bag and took out the wooden box. She opened the box and took out the first postcard. She studied the painting again. The white lighthouse stood so straight and proud against the blue sea. It seemed patient. It was waiting for her. The word salt seemed to hang in the air around her. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine what a place like that would be like. She imagined the feel of the wind and the sound of the waves. A feeling of rightness settled over her. This was what she was supposed to be doing. She did not know where the train would take her. She did not know what she would find. But for the first time in a very long time, she felt like she was moving. Not just her body, but her whole self. After a while, a train's departure was announced over the speakers. The voice was calm and distant. It was a train heading toward the coast. It felt right. She stood up, put the postcard carefully back in its box, and walked toward the platform. She showed her ticket to the conductor at the gate. He was an older man with a kind face. He nodded and pointed her toward the train. "Have a good journey," he said. Clara smiled, a real smile. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it felt strong. She stepped onto the train. The carriage was old. It was not like the new plastic trains that served the city. This one had character. The seats were covered in a soft, dark red velvet that was worn smooth in places. The walls were paneled with polished dark wood. The luggage racks above the seats were made of brass. It smelled faintly of polish and old journeys. She found an empty seat by a large window. She put her small bag on the seat next to her. The carriage was mostly empty. A few other people were scattered around, reading books or looking out the window. A low hum filled the air, sound of the train waiting. A whistle blew somewhere outside, a long, mournful sound. Then, with a gentle jolt, the train began to move. It started slowly, groaning and creaking, like an old man getting out of a chair. She pressed her face close to the cool glass of the window. The platform slid away. The face of the conductor disappeared. The station itself began to move backward, the grand arches and the clock tower shrinking until they were gone. The journey had truly begun. The sound of the train settled into a steady rhythm. A clatter, a click, a click. The wheels on the track made a constant, hypnotic song. It was a sound that did not demand attention. It was a sound that you could sink into. Clara leaned her head against the window frame. The vibration of the carriage traveled through her, a gentle, constant hum. It was a soothing feeling. For the first hour, the train moved through the edges of the city. She saw the backs of buildings, brick walls covered in colorful spray paint, small patches of grass where weeds grew tall. She saw laundry hanging on lines between buildings, fluttering like flags of everyday life. She saw glimpses into the windows of apartments, quick pictures of lives she would never know. A woman watering a plant, a child playing with a toy car on the floor. It all felt very far away, like she was watching a movie. Slowly, the tall buildings and the dense rows of houses gave way to smaller buildings. The suburbs stretched out with neat lawns and cars parked in driveways. The train moved faster now, the rhythm of the wheels a little quicker. The clicks and clatters blurred into a single, rushing sound. Clara took the postcard out again. She held it in her lap and looked at it as the world rushed by outside her window. The lighthouse, the cliff, the sea. Salt, she thought about her gratitude. Had she stood on that exact cliff? Had she painted this picture herself? The handwriting on the back was so elegant, so sure. It was the handwriting of a person who knew exactly who they were. Clara felt she did not know who she was at all. Maybe that was the point of the journey, to find out. The suburbs melted away, and the landscape opened up. Now there were fields, great wide squares of green and brown and yellow. The colors were soft under the pale gray sky. The train tracks ran alongside a small road. For a while, she watched the cars on the road. They seemed to be racing the train. Sometimes a car would pull ahead, and sometimes the train would. It was a silent, simple game. Then the road turned away, and the train was alone again, cutting a path through the open country. She saw a farm, a red barn and a white house sat among a group of trees. A line of cows stood by a fence, watching the train pass with slow, uninterested eyes. Their stillness was a contrast to the train's constant motion. The sun came out from behind the clouds. The light streamed into the carriage, and the dust motes began their dance again, just like they did in the library. But here, they were dancing to the rhythm of the train, to the song of the journey. The light made the green of the fields outside seem brighter, more alive. The world looked freshly washed. Clara felt a sense of peace settle over her. The quiet order of her old life had been a comfort, but it had also been a cage. This movement, this uncertainty, this was a different kind of peace. It was the peace of letting go. She watched the landscape change. The flat fields began to gently roll. Hills appeared in the distance, soft and green, like sleeping animals. The train began to climb, and the engine's hum grew a little deeper. The rhythm of the wheels slowed down a little. The train moved through cuttings in the hills, with high banks of earth on either side. Then it would emerge onto a high point, and she could see for miles. She saw small villages nestled in the valleys, a church spire pointing to the sky. She saw forests of dark green trees. The world was so much bigger than her library, so much bigger than her small apartment. Hours passed. Clara did not read. She did not listen to music. She just watched. She watched the shadows of the clouds move across the hills. She felt the gentle rocking of the train. Her mind, which was usually so busy with lists and order and quiet worries, became still. There was nothing to organize here, nothing to fix. There was only watching. The afternoon began to fade. The light turned golden. The shadows grew long, and then she felt a change. It was not something she saw at first. It was a change in the air. The train window was open, just a crack, and a new smell came in on the breeze. It was a sharp, clean smell. It was the smell of salt. At first it was very faint, just a hint, but as the train traveled on, it grew stronger. It was a real, physical thing. She could almost taste it on her tongue. Her heart beat a little faster. She was getting close. She pressed her face to the window again, searching the horizon, and then she saw it. A thin, dark blue line in the far, far distance. The sea, it was just a sliver of color between the green of the land and the pale blue of the sky. But it was there. The sight of it made the feeling in her chest grow stronger. The postcard was not just a painting anymore. It was a real place, and she was going there. The train began its descent. It rolled down from the hills, moving back toward the flat land that bordered the coast. The trees changed. They were shorter now, and their branches all seemed to bend in one direction, shaped by a wind she could not yet feel. The grass grew in tough-looking clumps. The signs of the sea were everywhere. The blue line on the horizon grew wider and wider until it filled the bottom of her window. She could see whitecaps now, small flashes of white on the dark blue water, and the sound changed too. Underneath the clatter of the train, she could hear a new sound, a low, constant roar, the sound of the waves. The cry of seagulls reached her, sharp and clear, cutting through the sound of the train. They swooped and circled in the sky, white birds against the blue. The train slowed down considerably. It passed a few small houses, their paint faded and peeling from the salty air. Small fishing boats were pulled up on a patch of stony beach. The final part of the journey was slow. The train seemed to be taking its time, as if it wanted her to see everything, to prepare her. It rolled past a small harbor filled with colorful boats bobbing on the water. The smell of salt was mixed now with the smell of fish and diesel and wet rope. It was the smell of a place where people made their living from the sea. The train's brakes hissed. The carriage gave a final, gentle shudder, and then was still. The rhythmic clatter was gone. The silence that replaced it was filled with the sounds of the town outside. The gulls, the distant waves, the faint clang of a rope against a metal mast. An announcement came over the speaker, but the voice was crackly and hard to understand. But Clara heard the words she needed to hear. Port Blossom. This station is Port Blossom. She stood up and pulled her bag from the seat. She felt a little unsteady on her feet after so many hours of motion. She walked to the door of the carriage. She took a deep breath. She was nervous, but it was a good kind of nervousness. It was the feeling of standing at the beginning of something important. She pushed the heavy door open and stepped down from the train onto a simple wooden platform. The air hit her full in the face. It was cool and damp, and so full of the smell of salt that it felt like she could chew on it. The taste was on her lips. A strong breeze blew in from the sea, pulling at her hair and her clothes. It felt wild and clean. The station was tiny. It was just the platform and a small wooden building with a sign that read Port Blossom in faded blue letters. The paint was chipping and the wood was gray from the weather. Clara stood on the platform for a long moment, her small bag in her hand. The train she had just left began to move again, pulling away with a sigh of air and a slow clatter, leaving her behind. She was alone in this new place. She looked up at the sky. A seagull flew directly overhead, letting out a loud, piercing cry. It was a cry of welcome. Clara smiled. She had arrived. The first part of her journey was over. The next part was about to begin. She looked around the small town, ready to explore. Chapter 2. The Town of Salt and Sea. Clara stood on the weathered wooden platform of Port Blossom Station. The train that had brought her here was now just a distant shape, shrinking as it followed the coastline away from the town. Soon it was gone, and the sound of its wheels was swallowed by the much larger, older sound of the sea. The air was cool and heavy with moisture. It carried the strong, clean scent of salt that she had first smelled on the train, but here it was much more powerful. It was mixed with other smells too. The sharp smell of fish, the damp smell of wet wood from the platform, and the earthy smell of seaweed drying on rocks somewhere nearby. For a few moments, she did not move. She just stood there, holding her small bag, and let this new place wash over her. The station building was small, made of wood that had been painted blue a long time ago. Now the paint was peeling and faded, revealing the gray, salt-bleached wood underneath. The wind, a constant steady pressure from the sea, whistled softly around the corners of the small building. High above, seagulls circled and cried out. Their calls were sharp and wild, so different from the soft cooing of pigeons in her city. She was the only person who had gotten off the train. The platform was empty. The town was quiet. It felt as if she had arrived in a place that was sleeping, even in the middle of the afternoon. She took her first steps off the platform and onto a path made of crushed shells. The shells crunched softly under her sturdy shoes. The path led toward a small cluster of buildings. This must be the town. She walked slowly, taking everything in. The houses were small and close together, as if huddling for warmth against the sea wind. They were painted in different colors, but the salt and the sun had faded them all. There was a soft yellow house, a pale pink house, a light blue house. The colors were gentle, like colors in a child's watercolor painting. The roofs were made of dark gray slate, and many had patches of bright green moss growing on them. The streets were not paved with asphalt. They were made of smooth gray cobblestones, worn down by countless years of footsteps and rain. The stones were uneven, and she had to watch her step. Walking on them made her feel connected to the ground, to the history of the place. She passed windows with simple white curtains. In one window, a cat with orange fur was curled up, fast asleep in a patch of afternoon sun. In another, a single red geranium sat in a clay pot, a bright spot of color against the faded paint of the windowsill. There were no people on the street. She could hear faint sounds coming from inside the houses, the murmur of a television, the clink of a dish. Life was happening here, but it was happening indoors, hidden away from the wind. The cobblestone street sloped gently downward, and as she walked, the smell of the harbor grew stronger. She came to the edge of the town, where the houses stopped and the harbor began. It was not a large harbor. A stone wall, thick and solid, curved around a small bay, protecting it from the open sea. Inside the wall, the water was calm, a deep, murky green. Dozens of small fishing boats were tied up to wooden docks. They bobbed gently on the water, their ropes creaking softly. The boats were like the houses, colorful but weathered. They had names painted on their sides in simple letters. The Sea Serpent, Lucky Day, Anna's Pride. On the docks, piles of fishing nets lay in tangled heaps. The air here was thick with the smell of fish and salt water, and the faint, oily smell of boat engines. A few fishermen were working on their boats. They moved slowly and efficiently, mending nets or cleaning their decks. They did not look up as she passed. They were absorbed in their work, part of the slow, steady rhythm of the harbor. The only sounds were the creaking of the boats, the cry of the gulls, the gentle lapping of the water against the stone wall, and the constant sigh of the wind. Clara found a low stone wall to sit on. She put her bag down beside her and watched. She watched the water, the boats, the fishermen. She watched the clouds move slowly across the sky. The pace of this place was so different from her city. In the city, everything was a rush. Here, time seemed to stretch and slow down. It was measured not by clocks, but by the turning of the tide and the movement of the sun. A tension she had not even known was there began to melt away. After a long time, she felt a little cold. The sea breeze was persistent. She stood up, picked up her bag, and walked back into the maze of small streets. She was not looking for a hotel. She did not think a town like this would have a hotel. She was looking for a sign in a window, a small notice that said "Room to Let." She walked up one street and down another. The streets were narrow and winding. Sometimes a street would end abruptly in a high stone wall, and she would have to turn back. She did not mind. She was not lost. She was exploring. As she turned a corner, a new smell reached her, overriding the salt and the fish. It was a warm, sweet, comforting smell. The smell of baking bread. It drew her forward. She followed the smell to a small shop on a corner. It had a large window and a bright red door. A simple wooden sign hung above the door. It had a picture of a loaf of bread painted on it. This was the town bakery. The smell coming from it was wonderful. It was a smell of home, of warmth, of simple goodness. Through the window, she could see shelves filled with loaves of bread, brown and golden. There were also trays of pastries and buns. Clara felt a pull toward the red door. She needed a place to stay, and a place that smelled this good felt like a good place to start. She pushed the door open. A small bell chimed, a cheerful, tinkling sound. The warmth from the bakery wrapped around her like a blanket. It was a small shop with a wooden counter and a floor made of wide, dark wooden planks. The air was warm and delicious. Behind the counter stood a woman with gray hair tied up in a neat bun. She had a kind, round face and wore a white apron dusted with flour. The woman looked up from the tray of buns she was arranging and smiled at Clara. It was a genuine, welcoming smile. "Hello, dear," she said. Her voice was as warm as the shop. Clara found her own voice was a little hesitant. "Hello," she said. "I was wondering. I am looking for a place to stay for a few nights. Do you know of any?" The woman wiped her hands on her apron. "You're in luck," she said. "We have a room upstairs. It's simple, but it's clean and it's quiet. Most of the time," she chuckled. "Except in the morning, when the ovens get going." "That sounds perfect," Clara said. "How much is it?" The woman named a price. It was a small price. Clara immediately agreed. "It's yours then," the baker said. "My name is Agnes. Let me show you." Agnes came out from behind the counter and led Clara to a narrow door at the back of the shop. "The entrance is just through here," she said. She opened the door, and they were in a small hallway. A narrow, steep staircase led up. "Watch your step," Agnes said. Clara followed her up the stairs. The wood of the stairs creaked under her feet. At the top of the stairs, there was a short hallway with 2 doors. Agnes opened the one at the end. "Here we are," she said, pushing the door open. The room was simple, just as Agnes had said, but it was lovely. The floor was made of the same wide, dark wooden planks as the shop below. The walls were painted a soft, creamy white. There was a sturdy wooden bed with a thick, handmade quilt on it. The quilt was a patchwork of different colors and patterns. There was a small wooden table and a single wooden chair. A small, dark wardrobe stood in one corner. The room was perfectly clean. It smelled faintly of wood polish and clean laundry. But the best part of the room was the window. It was a large window that looked out over the town. From here, she could see the colorful roofs, the winding cobblestone streets, and beyond them, the harbor. She could see the boats bobbing on the green water and the great gray stone wall holding back the sea. It was a perfect view. "The bathroom is just across the hall," Agnes said. "There's fresh towels in the wardrobe. If you need anything, just come down to the shop. I'm here most of the day." "Thank you," Clara said. "It's a beautiful room." Agnes smiled again. "Get yourself settled in," she said. "I'll leave you to it." She closed the door softly behind her, and Clara was alone in her new, temporary home. Clara put her bag on the floor. She walked over to the window and looked out. The view was even better than it had seemed at first. She could trace the path she had walked from the station, through the town, to the harbor. It all looked so small and perfect from up here. The sounds of the town were softer from this high up. The cry of the gulls was more distant. The sigh of the wind was a gentle whisper. She stayed at the window for a long time, just looking. The sun was beginning to get lower in the sky. The lights softened, turning from bright afternoon white to a warm golden yellow. The shadows of the houses stretched out, long and thin, across the cobblestone streets. She watched the fishermen in the harbor finish their work for the day. They covered their boats and began to walk home, their boots clumping on the wooden docks. The harbor grew quiet. Lights started to appear in the windows of the houses below, one by one, small warm squares of yellow light in the growing dusk. She finally turned away from the window. She unpacked her small bag. It did not take long. She put her few clothes in the dark wardrobe. She put her toothbrush on the small shelf in the bathroom. She took out the wooden box and placed it on the small table by the bed. She opened the box and took out the first postcard, the one with the lighthouse. She propped it up on the table so the painting was facing her. The lighthouse on the postcard looked just like a place that would belong here, in this town by the sea. As darkness fell completely, Clara felt hungry. The smell of bread from the bakery was long gone, but the memory of it made her stomach rumble. She went downstairs. The shop was closed, but a light was on in the back. She found Agnes in a small kitchen behind the shop, sitting at a table and reading a book. "Hello again, dear," Agnes said, looking up. "Are you hungry? I have some soup." "I would love some, thank you," Clara said. Agnes ladled some thick vegetable soup into a bowl and gave her a thick slice of fresh, crusty bread. Clara sat at the small kitchen table with Agnes and ate her meal. They did not talk much. Agnes was a comfortable person to be quiet with. The soup was hot and delicious. The bread was the best she had ever tasted. It was a simple meal, but it felt like a feast. After she had finished, she thanked Agnes and went back up to her room. The town outside was very dark now. There were no streetlights in Port Blossom. The only light came from the windows of the houses and the faint glow of the moon hiding behind the clouds. Clara got ready for bed. She put on her simple nightgown and slid under the heavy quilt on the bed. The sheets were cool and smelled of fresh air. The bed was firm and comfortable. She lay on her back and listened. The town was almost completely silent. The only sounds were the distant, rhythmic crash of the waves on the shore and the faint, low moan of the wind. They were peaceful sounds. They were the sounds of the world breathing. She closed her eyes. She thought of her small apartment in the city, its view of a brick wall and the constant low hum of city traffic. This place, this room, this town, felt a world away. She felt safe here. She felt calm. She fell asleep faster than she had in years, to the sound of the sea. She woke up slowly the next morning. The first thing she noticed was the smell. A rich, warm, yeasty smell was drifting up from the bakery below. It filled the entire room. It was a wonderful way to wake up. The second thing she noticed was the light. The sun was streaming through her window, making bright patterns on the wooden floor. She got out of bed and went to the window. The town was awake. The harbor was busy again. Fishermen were on their boats, getting ready to go out for the day. The sound of their voices and the rumble of their boat engines carried on the morning air. Smoke was rising from the chimneys of the small houses. Port Blossom was a different place in the morning light. It was full of energy and purpose. Clara dressed quickly. She was eager to go outside to explore. She felt a sense of excitement. Today, she would look for the lighthouse. She went downstairs to the bakery. The shop was open and busy. A few people from the town were inside, buying their daily bread. They all seemed to know Agnes. They chatted and laughed together. Clara bought a warm, flaky pastry for her breakfast. As she was paying, she took the postcard from her pocket. She showed it to Agnes. "I am trying to find this place," she said, pointing to the painting of the lighthouse. Agnes looked at the postcard and smiled. "Ah, the old light," she said. "That's an easy walk. A bit of a climb, but easy to find." She pointed out the window of the shop. "You see that path, the one that goes up behind the last row of houses? Just follow that. It takes you all the way along the top of the cliffs. You cannot miss the lighthouse. It's the only thing up there." "Thank you," Clara said. "Thank you very much." "Enjoy your walk, dear," Agnes said. "It's a beautiful day for it." Clara ate her pastry as she walked through the town. It was buttery and delicious. She followed Agnes's directions, finding the path easily. It started as a cobblestone lane between two houses. Then it turned into a simple dirt track. The path began to climb almost immediately. It was a gentle slope at first, winding its way up the hill that rose behind the town. As she climbed, the houses of Port Blossom fell away below her. She could look back and see the entire town laid out like a map. The colorful roofs, the smoking chimneys, the harbor with its busy little boats. The higher she climbed, the stronger the wind became. It was a clean, powerful wind that blew her hair back from her face and filled her lungs with fresh, salty air. The path grew steeper. She could feel the effort in her legs, the steady beat of her heart. It was a good feeling. It felt like she was working toward something. The path was narrow, just a strip of bare earth cutting through thick, tough-looking grass. All around her, small wildflowers grew. There were tiny blue flowers that hugged the ground, bright yellow flowers that looked like little cups of sunshine, and clusters of white flowers that smelled sweet and peppery. She had never seen flowers like these before. They were hardy and beautiful, thriving in the wind and the salt. The sound of the sea grew louder and louder as she climbed. It was no longer a distant, gentle crash. It was a deep, powerful roar. The path leveled out, and she found herself on top of the cliffs. The view was breathtaking. To her left, the land stretched away, a carpet of green and brown. To her right, there was nothing but the sea. It was immense, a vast expanse of deep, sparkling blue that stretched all the way to the horizon. The sun was bright on the water, and the waves were capped with white foam. She could see the power of the water as it crashed against the base of the cliffs far below. The sound was a constant, thundering boom, and she could feel the vibration of it through the soles of her shoes. The path now followed the very edge of the cliff. It was a safe distance from the edge, but she felt a thrill of excitement walking so close to such a wild, powerful force of nature. She was completely alone. There was no one else on the path. It was just her, the wind, the sea, and the sky. She walked for what felt like a long time. The path rose and fell with the contours of the cliff. Sometimes it would dip down into a small, sheltered hollow, and the wind would die down. Then it would climb again to an exposed headland, and the wind would hit her with its full force. She did not feel tired. The energy of the place seemed to flow into her. She felt wide awake, alive in a way she had not felt in a very long time. She rounded a sharp bend in the path, and then she saw it. There, on the next headland, stood the lighthouse. It was exactly as it was in the painting, tall and white and perfectly round. It stood proudly against the blue sky, a beacon of strength and simplicity. The large lamp at the top was dark now in the daylight, but she could imagine its powerful light at night. Next to the lighthouse was a small, one-story cottage, also painted white, with a dark slate roof. It looked sturdy and safe, built to withstand the worst of the sea storms. A low stone wall enclosed a small patch of garden around the cottage. Clara stopped walking. She just stood and looked. It was a powerful moment. The postcard in her pocket was not just a picture. It was real. Her journey was real. She had followed a painted image and a single word, and they had led her to this exact spot. A feeling of deep satisfaction washed over her. She had done it. She had found the first place. She started walking again, more slowly now, toward the lighthouse. As she got closer, she could see more details. The white paint was thick and clean. The glass of the lantern room at the top sparkled in the sun. It was clearly a place that was well cared for. As she approached the low stone wall, she saw a man in the garden. He was an old man, with white hair and a face that was deeply lined, like a map of his long life. He was wearing a thick blue sweater and was busy painting the small wooden gate of the garden fence. He moved slowly and carefully, his hands steady as he applied a fresh coat of white paint. He did not seem to have noticed her. Clara felt a moment of shyness. She did not want to disturb him, but she had come all this way. She walked to the gate. "Hello," she said. Her voice was carried away by the wind, and she had to say it again, a little louder. "Hello." The old man looked up. He had very clear, pale blue eyes, the color of the sea on a calm day. He looked at her without surprise, as if visitors were a normal, if infrequent, event. He gave her a slow, gentle nod. He did not smile, but his eyes were kind. Clara took the postcard from her pocket and held it out to him. "I have this," she said. "I was trying to find this place." The man put his paintbrush down carefully on a piece of newspaper. He wiped his hands on a rag and took the postcard from her. He held it in his weathered hands and looked at it for a long time. He looked at the painting, then he looked up at his lighthouse, then back at the painting. He nodded again. "It is a good likeness," he said. His voice was quiet and rough, like stones being rolled in the tide. "My wife painted that, a long time ago." Clara was surprised. She had wondered if her great-aunt had painted it. But this made a different kind of sense. "It's beautiful," Clara said. "She was a good painter," the man said simply. He handed the postcard back to her. "You walked all the way up from the town." It was not a question, but a statement. "Yes," Clara said. "It was a lovely walk." "It is a good walk," he agreed. He looked at her for a moment. "You look thirsty," he said. "Come in, I will make some tea." His name was Silas. He led her through the newly painted gate and into the small cottage. The inside was as simple and clean as the outside. It was one main room with a small kitchen area at one end and a living area at the other. The furniture was old and made of dark, polished wood. There was a comfortable-looking armchair by a small stone fireplace. The room was filled with things from the sea. On the shelves, there were rows of beautiful shells, pieces of smooth, gray driftwood, and glass floats from fishing nets. A large old map of the coastline hung on one wall. The whole cottage smelled of wood smoke and sea salt. Silas put a kettle on the stove and got out 2 mugs. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace. Clara sat at the small wooden table. She felt completely at ease in this quiet man's home. He brought 2 steaming mugs of tea to the table and sat down opposite her. The tea was hot and strong. She wrapped her cold hands around the warm mug. They sat in silence for a while, just sipping their tea and listening to the wind outside. It was a comfortable silence. "I am the keeper of the light," Silas said, finally. "I have been for 50 years. 50 years, Clara repeated softly. It seemed like an impossibly long time. "It is a quiet life," he said, "but it is a good life. The sea is always different. Every day, it is a new thing to look at. The color of the water changes, the sound of the waves changes, the light changes." He told her simple stories, not stories of shipwrecks and great storms, but quiet stories of observation. He told her about the different kinds of birds that nested on the cliffs. He told her how to tell what the weather would be by the shape of the clouds on the horizon. He told her about a family of seals that sometimes came to rest on the rocks at the bottom of the cliff. His stories were simple, but they were full of a deep knowledge and love for this place. Clara listened, absorbed. She felt like she was learning the secrets of the sea. She stayed for a long time, talking with Silas and drinking tea. The afternoon began to fade. The sun started to sink toward the horizon, and the color of the light changed from bright blue to soft orange and pink. "You should stay and see the light come on," Silas said. "It is the best part of the day." So she stayed. As dusk began to settle, Silas went outside. Clara followed him. He went into the base of the lighthouse tower. He came back a few moments later and looked up at the top of the tower. "Any minute now," he said. They stood together in the growing twilight, the wind cool on their faces. And then it happened. A huge, brilliant beam of white light flashed out from the lantern room. It was so bright, it made Clara blink. The beam swept across the land, lighting up the green cliffs. Then it swept out across the sea, a long finger of light pointing into the darkness. Then it was gone. The world was dark for a few seconds, and then the light came again, sweeping its silent, powerful path. Flash, darkness, flash, darkness. It was a steady, reliable rhythm, a heartbeat of light in the vast darkness. "It helps the ships find their way home," Silas said, his voice full of quiet pride. "It keeps them safe from the rocks." They watched the light for a long time. Its steady pulse was deeply calming. It was a promise that even in the darkness, there was a guide. There was a way. It was almost completely dark now. "You should get back to the town before it gets too late," Silas said. "The path can be tricky in the dark." "Yes," Clara said. "I should." She thanked him for the tea and the stories. "You are welcome to visit again," he said. "The path is always open." Clara smiled. "Thank you, Silas." She walked away from the lighthouse, back toward the path. The beam of light from the lighthouse swept over her, lighting her way for a moment, before sweeping out to sea. She walked back along the clifftop path in the deepening night. She was not afraid. The moon was out now, a silver crescent in the dark sky, and she had the lighthouse. Every few seconds, its powerful beam would flash across the path, showing her the way. It was her own personal guide. The walk back felt different. The world was transformed by the darkness and the moonlight. The sea was a black, mysterious expanse, its sound a deep, constant murmur. When she finally saw the lights of Port Blossom twinkling in the distance below, they looked like a small handful of fallen stars. She made her way down the path and through the quiet, sleeping streets of the town. When she got back to the bakery, she let herself in quietly and went up to her room. From her window, she could still see the lighthouse. It was a tiny point of light in the distance, but she could see its steady flash. Flash, darkness. Flash, darkness. She sat in the chair by the window and watched it for hours. It was a comforting, hypnotic sight. The light was a constant presence, a faithful friend watching over the town, watching over the sea, watching over her. Clara stayed in Port Blossom for 2 more days. She fell into a simple, peaceful rhythm. She would wake to the smell of bread. She would buy a pastry from Agnes and walk. Sometimes she would walk along the harbor, watching the fishing boats come and go. Sometimes she would walk on the beach, collecting smooth, colorful stones that had been tumbled by the waves. And every day, she would walk the cliff-top path to the lighthouse. She would sit with Silas, and they would drink tea and talk, or sometimes just sit in comfortable silence, watching the sea. She felt a sense of peace in Port Blossom that she had never known. The quiet life, the steady rhythms of the town and the sea, the kindness of Agnes and Silas. It was a healing place. On the evening of her third day, she was sitting in her room, watching the lighthouse beam sweep across the dark water. She felt a familiar feeling stir inside her, a quiet restlessness, a pull. She had found the place of salt. She had understood its peace and its steady strength, but it was not her final destination. Her journey was not over. She took out the wooden box. She lifted the lid and looked at the postcards inside. She took out the next one in the stack. It was the painting of the old stone bridge, the rushing river, and the misty mountains. She turned it over. On the back, glued to the card, was another train ticket, and below it, the mountains were calling to her. The next part of her journey was waiting. The next morning, she would pack her bag. She would thank Agnes, and she would walk back to the little train station on the edge of the town, ready for whatever came next. Chapter 3. The Train to the High Mountains. The morning she was to leave Port Blossom, Clara woke early. It was not an alarm that woke her, or the sun, which was still hidden behind a thick blanket of gray sea mist. It was the familiar, comforting smell of baking bread that drifted up from Agnes's bakery below. It was a smell she had grown to love over the past few days. It meant a new day was starting in this quiet town by the sea. For a moment, lying in the warm bed under the heavy quilt, she felt a pang of sadness. She did not want to leave. She had found a simple peace here, a rhythm that matched the slow, steady beat of the waves on the shore. She could imagine staying here for a long time. She could imagine a life of waking to the smell of bread, walking the cliff-top path, and watching the lighthouse flash its steady signal into the night. It would be a good life, a quiet life, but it would not be her life. The pull of the journey, the mystery of the postcards, was stronger than the comfort of this place. The box on her small table was a promise of other places, other feelings, other parts of herself she had not yet discovered. She got out of bed and went to the window. The town was quiet. The mist was thick, hiding the harbor and the sea. It wrapped the small, colorful houses in a soft, white silence. She could hear the distant foghorn of a ship out on the hidden water, a long, low, mournful sound. It was a sound that spoke of distance and travel. It was a sound that told her it was time to go. She washed her face with cold water, the chill of it waking her up completely. She dressed in her simple, practical clothes. Packing took only a few minutes. Her few belongings fit easily into her small bag. She folded her clothes neatly. She placed the wooden box with the postcards in the very center, cushioning it with her sweater. The last thing she did was take the postcard of the lighthouse from the table. She looked at the painting one last time. The tall white tower, the green cliff, the blue sea. She had been there. She had stood on that cliff. She had felt the wind and heard the roar of the water. She had met Silas. The postcard was not just a picture anymore. It was a memory. She placed it carefully back in the box, on top of the other postcards, and closed the lid. Her small room looked empty now, as if she had never been there. Only the faint indentation on the pillow showed that someone had slept in the bed. She carried her bag downstairs. The door to the bakery was open, and the warm, bright light spilled out into the gray morning. Agnes was behind the counter, her hands covered in flour, shaping loaves of dough with expert speed. She looked up as Clara came in, and her kind face broke into a smile. "Leaving us already, dear?" she asked. Her voice was warm, with no hint of surprise. It was as if she understood that Clara was just passing through. "Yes," Clara said. "My train leaves this morning." "Well, you cannot travel on an empty stomach," Agnes said. She wiped her hands on her apron and took a warm, crusty bread roll from a basket. She wrapped it in a piece of clean paper. "For the journey," she said, holding it out to Clara. Clara took the warm package. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for everything, for the room, for the soup, for your kindness." "It was no trouble at all," Agnes said. "It was nice to have you here. Come back and visit Port Blossom again someday." "I will," Clara said, and she knew she meant it. She would not forget this place. She paid for her room, a small handful of coins that felt like not nearly enough for the peace she had found here. She turned to leave. "Safe travels," Agnes called after her. Clara pushed open the red door, and the bell chimed its cheerful farewell. She stepped out into the misty street, the warm bread roll clutched in her hand. The walk to the station was quiet. The cobblestones were slick with mist, and her footsteps made no sound. The town was still waking up. A few lights were on in the houses, and the smell of wood smoke was beginning to mix with the salty air. She walked past the harbor. The boats were ghostly shapes in the mist, their masts disappearing into the white air. The water was still and silent. She reached the small, weathered train station. The platform was empty and damp. She sat on a wooden bench to wait. She ate the bread roll from Agnes. It was still warm. The crust was crisp, and the inside was soft and fluffy. It tasted of simple goodness. As she ate, the mist began to thin. The sun, a pale white disk, started to appear through the clouds. Patches of blue sky opened up. The world was slowly being revealed again. She heard the train before she saw it. A distant rumble that grew steadily louder. Then it emerged from the thinning mist, its single headlight cutting through the gray. It was a different kind of train from the one that had brought her here. This train was smaller, with only 2 carriages. It looked stronger, more powerful. The engine at the front was big and black, and it chugged and hissed as it pulled into the station. It seemed to have a different purpose. The first train was for gliding across flat land. This train looked like it was made for climbing. The train shuddered to a stop. The doors opened with a hiss of air. Clara was the only one waiting on the platform. A conductor in a dark uniform leaned out of a door. He nodded to her, and she nodded back. She climbed the steep metal steps into the carriage. The inside was different too. It was more practical, less comfortable than the first train. The seats were not soft velvet. They were made of hard, dark green leather. The walls were plain wood, not polished, but scrubbed clean. There were no brass luggage racks, just simple metal shelves. Everything about this train felt solid and strong. It was a working train, not a train for leisure. She found a seat by a window and put her bag on the shelf above her head. There were only a few other people in the carriage. A man reading a newspaper, a young woman with a large backpack, asleep with her head against the window, an old farmer with a chicken in a wooden crate on his lap. The train gave a loud blast of its whistle, a sharp, commanding sound. With a powerful jolt, it began to move. It pulled away from Port Blossom Station, leaving the small, faded blue building behind. For a few minutes, the train followed the coast, and Clara could see the sea for the last time. The mist had almost completely cleared now, and the water was a calm, gray blue under the morning sun. She saw the clifftop path she had walked. In the distance, a tiny white speck on the headland was the lighthouse. She watched it until it disappeared behind a curve in the land. Goodbye, she thought. Goodbye and thank you. Then the train turned inland. The sea was gone. The scenery began to change, but this time in reverse. The tough, salt-resistant grasses and low, wind-bent trees gave way to lusher, greener fields. The land became softer, more gentle. The train picked up speed, the chugging of the engine settling into a strong, steady rhythm. It was a slower rhythm than the first train, a more deliberate beat. It felt like the train was conserving its energy, saving its strength for the hard work that was to come. Clara settled back in her hard leather seat. She was on her way again. The feeling of leaving had been sad, but the feeling of moving, of heading toward something new and unknown, was exciting. She took the wooden box from her bag. She did not want to put the box on the metal shelf. She kept it on her lap. It felt like the heart of her journey. She opened the lid and took out the second postcard. She held it in her hands and studied it. The painting was as beautiful and simple as the first one. It showed an old, elegant bridge made of pale gray stone. The bridge had a single, perfect arch. Under the arch, a river rushed by. The water was painted with quick, white strokes to show that it was moving fast. On both sides of the river, tall, dark green pine trees grew. Their pointed tops reached toward the sky, and behind the trees, in the background, were mountains. They were huge and misty, their peaks lost in the clouds. They looked ancient and mysterious. She turned the postcard over. The train ticket was glued neatly to the back, and below it, the single, elegant word, echo. Echo. Clara said the word softly to herself. The sound was swallowed by the noise of the train. She thought about the word. An echo was a sound that came back, a reflection of a sound. It happened in big, empty spaces, in caves, in valleys, in the mountains. But she felt the word meant more than just a sound bouncing off a rock. Maybe it meant something about the past coming back, or a memory. Her great-aunt had chosen these words so carefully. Each one was a key. It was in the air, on her lips, in Silas's stories. Echo was the key to this new place. She would have to listen for it, not just with her ears, but with her whole self. She put the postcard on the small table that folded down from the back of the seat in front of her. She left it there, propped up against the window, so she could look at it as she traveled. The painting was her map. The word was her guide. The landscape outside the window continued to change. The train left the flat coastal plains far behind. It moved through rolling green hills, dotted with sheep that looked like small, fluffy white clouds against the green. It passed through small, tidy farms with stone walls and red-roofed barns. It crossed small, slow-moving rivers on sturdy iron bridges. The world was peaceful and green. It was a landscape of quiet, settled life. After several hours, she felt a change in the train's movement. The steady, powerful rhythm began to slow down. The engine's chugging became louder, more strained. The floor of the carriage began to tilt upwards, so slightly at first that she barely noticed it. But then the tilt became more obvious. She could feel it in her body. She was leaning back in her seat. The train had begun to climb. The rolling hills were becoming steeper, taller. They were no longer just hills. They were the foothills of the mountains. The train track, which had been running in a straight line for many miles, now began to curve and wind. It followed the shape of the land, hugging the side of a hill, then swinging around to cross a narrow valley on a high trestle bridge. When she looked out the window, she could see the ground falling away steeply below her. The train was getting higher and higher. The engine was working hard now. It made a deep, groaning sound, a sound of immense effort. The wheels on the track turned slowly, deliberately. The sound was a heavy, rhythmic clank, clank, clank. It was the sound of a slow, determined ascent. Clara pressed her face to the window. The scenery was becoming wilder. The neat fields and farms were gone. Now there were thick forests. The trees were different here. They were not the gentle, leafy trees of the lowlands. These were tall, straight pine trees with dark green needles. They grew so close together that they blocked out the sun. The train moved through a world of green twilight. The light that came into the carriage was dim and green, filtered through the thick canopy of needles. The air outside, coming through the crack in the window, started to smell different. The soft, grassy smell of the lowlands was replaced by a sharp, clean, resinous smell. The smell of pine. The train climbed higher. The forests grew thicker. For a long time, all she could see from her window was a solid wall of tree trunks and dark green branches. It felt like the train was moving through a long green tunnel. Sometimes there would be a break in the trees, and she would get a sudden, breathtaking view. She would look out across a deep, V-shaped valley with a silver thread of a river at the bottom. The opposite side of the valley would be a steep wall of more forest. The scale of everything was immense. She felt very small in this huge, wild landscape. Then the train would plunge back into the darkness of the trees. The ascent was relentless, higher and higher. The pine trees began to thin out. Patches of bare rock started to appear between them. The soil was thinner here, and only the hardiest trees could grow. The train moved through cuttings in the rock, with high, sheer walls of gray stone on either side. The sound of the engine and the wheels bounced off the rock walls, creating a loud, clattering roar. It was a powerful, overwhelming sound. She saw waterfalls. A stream of white water would suddenly appear, tumbling down a rock face and disappearing into the trees below. She saw streams that were not gentle and slow, but fast and white, crashing over beds of smooth gray boulders. The water was alive here. It was full of energy and movement, just like the river in her postcard. The air was changing again. It was becoming noticeably cooler. Clara had been comfortable in her sweater, but now she felt a chill. She closed the window a little more. The air that still came in was crisp and clean. It felt thin in her lungs, different from the heavy, moist air of the sea. It was the air of the high places. The people in the carriage were quiet. The old farmer was asleep, his head nodding on his chest. The chicken in the crate was silent. The young woman with the backpack was awake now, looking out the other window with a look of awe on her face. Everyone seemed to be affected by the scale and the silence of the mountains. The silence was strange. The train was making a lot of noise, the engine groaning, the wheels clanking. But beyond that noise, there was a profound silence, the silence of rock and sky. There were no sounds of towns, no sounds of traffic, not even the sound of many birds. It was a deep, ancient quiet. Clara looked at her postcard again. The misty mountains in the painting looked exactly like the mountains she was seeing outside her window. The tall pine trees were the same. The feeling of the place was the same. A feeling of age. The landscape was a perfect match for the painting. Now all she had to find was the bridge. The train climbed for another hour. It moved very slowly now, taking sharp curves with loud screeches from its wheels. The trees were smaller here, more gnarled and twisted, shaped by the wind and the cold. There were large areas of just bare rock, gray and weathered. The train was traveling on a narrow shelf, cut into the side of a mountain. On one side was a sheer wall of rock going up. On the other side was a dizzying drop into a deep valley. Clara tried not to look down too often. It made her feel lightheaded. She focused on the mountain opposite. She could see the lines and cracks in its rock face, like the wrinkles on an old face. Then the train went into a tunnel. The world outside disappeared completely. The carriage was plunged into darkness, except for the few dim electric lights on the ceiling. The sound of the train became a deafening roar, trapped and amplified by the tunnel walls. The air smelled of damp earth and cold stone. The tunnel seemed to go on for a long time. Clara sat in the rumbling darkness, her hand resting on the wooden box on her lap. she was not afraid. She felt a sense of anticipation. It was like the train was passing through a doorway, leaving one part of the world behind and entering another. Then, with a sudden flash of light, the train burst out of the tunnel. The view that met her eyes made her gasp. The train had come out onto a high plateau. It was a wide open space, nestled between the peaks of several mountains. The sky above was a brilliant, deep blue, a color she had never seen before. The air was so clear that the distant mountain peaks looked sharp and close, as if she could reach out and touch them. A small lake of impossibly clear turquoise water sat in the middle of the plateau, and on the edge of the lake, she saw a village. It was not a large village. It was a small cluster of buildings. They were not made of faded, painted wood like the houses in Port Blossom. These buildings were made of dark, heavy stone and thick, rough-hewn timber. They looked as if they had grown out of the mountain itself. They looked solid, strong, and permanent. Smoke rose from every chimney, thin white plumes that went straight up into the still, cold air. The train began to slow down even more, its brakes hissing. It was approaching a small station on the edge of the village. A simple wooden sign on the station building had a single name painted on it in white letters: Stone Hearth. This was it. This was the place. The train glided to a stop with a final, gentle sigh. The journey was over. The engine fell silent, and in that silence, Clara could hear a new sound. The distant rushing sound of a fast-moving river. The river from her postcard. She stood up and took her bag from the shelf. She put the wooden box inside it. She walked to the door of the carriage, her heart beating with a quiet excitement. She stepped down from the train onto a platform made of heavy wooden planks. The air that greeted her was a shock. It was so cold and crisp it felt like it could crack. It was filled with two smells: the sharp, clean scent of pine trees from the forests below, and the rich, comforting smell of burning wood from the village chimneys. It was a smell that spoke of warmth and shelter in a cold place. The station was just a small stone building, as solid and simple as the houses in the village. The train she had arrived on did not wait long. Its whistle blew, a sharp echo in the mountain air, and it began to pull away, leaving her alone on the platform. She stood for a long moment, just as she had in Port Blossom, letting this new place sink in. This place was the complete opposite of the sea. Port Blossom had been a place of soft edges, faded colors, and constant moist wind. This place, Stone Hearth, was a place of sharp edges, dark colors, and still cold air. The sea had been vast and open. The mountains were vast, but they enclosed her, their huge, silent peaks surrounding her on all sides. She felt small here, but not in a bad way. She felt humbled. She felt a sense of awe. She picked up her bag and walked off the platform toward the village of dark stone and rising smoke. Her search for the echo was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Village of Stone and Echoes. The air in Stone Hearth was thin and cold. It was a coldness that felt clean and pure, completely different from the damp chill of the sea. Clara stood on the wooden platform of the station and took a deep breath. The air filled her lungs and seemed to wake up every part of her. It smelled of two things: the sharp, sweet scent of pine trees, a scent that carried all the way up from the vast forests she had traveled through, and the warm, smoky scent of burning wood, which drifted from the chimneys of the village. It was a smell of wildness, a smell of home mixed together. She pulled her sweater tighter around her. The sun was bright in the deep blue sky, but it offered little warmth. This was a place where the cold had a permanent hold. She picked up her small bag, the leather handle cold against her hand, and stepped off the platform onto a path of dark, packed earth. The village was only a short walk away. As she got closer, she could see the houses more clearly. They were built to last, The walls were made of large, rough-hewn blocks of dark gray stone, fitted together with skill. The stone looked ancient, as if it had been pulled directly from the mountainside. The roofs were steep, designed to shed heavy snow, and were made of thick, dark timber beams and heavy slate tiles. The windows were small and deep-set, like watchful eyes looking out at the mountains. Everything about the village spoke of strength and endurance. It was a place built to withstand the harshness of the high mountains, to provide a safe, warm refuge from the wind and the cold. There were no bright, faded colors here like in Port Blossom. The village was a collection of dark grays and deep browns, the colors of the earth and the trees. It blended into the landscape, a natural part of the mountain world. The main street of the village was not cobblestone or paved. It was a wide track of hard-packed dirt and small stones. Her boots made a soft, crunching sound as she walked. The village was quiet. She saw a woman carrying a basket of firewood, her breath making a white cloud in the cold air. She nodded to Clara, a simple, brief gesture of acknowledgement. Clara nodded back. A large, fluffy dog with thick black fur lay on the wooden porch of one of the houses. It lifted its head, watched her pass with intelligent eyes, and then laid its head back down on its paws. The people and animals here seemed calm and self-contained, as if they had all the time in the world. Clara was looking for a place to stay. She scanned the solid stone buildings, looking for a sign. Halfway down the short main street, she saw it. Hanging from a thick wooden beam above a sturdy oak door was a simple, carved wooden sign. It showed a picture of a roaring fire and a steaming mug. There were no words, but the meaning was clear. This was the village inn, was the largest building in the village, 2 stories high, built with the same dark stone and heavy timber as all the other houses. It looked solid and welcoming. The windows on the ground floor glowed with a warm yellow light, a stark contrast to the bright, cold daylight outside. The promise of warmth pulled her toward the door. The door was made of thick, heavy planks of dark wood with black iron hinges. It had a large iron ring for a handle. She pulled on the ring, and the heavy door swung inward with a low groan. She stepped inside. The change was immediate and total. The cold, bright world of the outside was replaced by a world of warmth and dim, gentle light. The air inside was thick with the rich smells of wood smoke, roasting meat, and something sweet, like baking apples. A huge fireplace dominated the main room. It was big enough for a person to stand up in. A massive fire crackled and roared within it, logs as thick as her arm blazing with orange and yellow flames. The fire threw dancing shadows on the stone walls and the dark wood of the ceiling beams. The heat from it was intense and wonderful. It wrapped around her, seeping into her cold clothes and warming her skin. The room was large and low-ceilinged. A few heavy wooden tables and benches were scattered across the wide plank floor. A few people were sitting at the tables, talking in low voices, or just staring into the fire. They were dressed in thick wool sweaters and sturdy boots. They looked like they belonged here, as rugged and solid as the mountains themselves. At the far end of the room was a long wooden bar, polished smooth by countless hands over many years. Behind the bar stood a tall man. He was wiping a mug with a clean cloth. He had a thick gray beard and a quiet, watchful expression. He looked up as she came in, and his eyes met hers. He did not smile, but he gave a small nod, a silent welcome. Clara walked over to the bar, her boots making a solid sound on the wooden floor. She put her bag down beside her. "Hello," she said. Her voice sounded small in the large, quiet room. "I'm looking for a room." The innkeeper stopped polishing the mug and placed it carefully on a shelf. "We have rooms," he said. His voice was deep and slow. "For how many nights?" "I'm not sure," Clara said honestly. "A few nights, maybe." The innkeeper considered this for a moment. "That is fine," he said. He reached under the bar and brought out a large, heavy iron key. He placed it on the bar, the room at the top of the stairs. On the right, pay when you leave. It was simple. There were no forms to fill out, no questions asked. She was a stranger, but she was accepted. She took the heavy key. It was cold in her hand. "Thank you," she said. The innkeeper simply nodded again and went back to his work. Clara picked up her bag and the key and went to the staircase in the corner of the room. The stairs were made of the same dark, heavy wood as the rest of the inn. They were wide and solid, and they creaked with a deep, satisfying groan under her weight. The upstairs hallway was dim, lit only by a small window at the far end. There were 3 doors. Hers was the one on the right. The key was heavy in the lock. She turned it, and the lock made a loud, solid clunk. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was wonderful. It was small and cozy, a perfect refuge. The first thing she saw was the fireplace. It was a small version of the giant one downstairs, built into the stone wall. A fire was already laid, ready to be lit, with a neat pile of split logs and a box of matches beside it. The bed was wide and low, covered with a thick, heavy wool blanket, the color of dark moss. On top of the blanket was a quilt made of dark reds and blues and greens. It looked incredibly warm. There was a small, sturdy wooden table and a single chair by the window. The floor was covered with a thick, woven rug that was soft under her feet. The walls were plain, rough plaster, painted a warm cream color. The room felt safe. It felt like a nest, a warm, secure place hidden in the heart of the cold mountains. She went to the window. It was small and had thick glass. The view was astounding. She could see over the roofs of the village to the vast mountain landscape beyond. The sharp, snow-dusted peak of a huge mountain dominated the view, its stark beauty taking her breath away. She could see the dark green of the pine forests clinging to the lower slopes. The world outside was immense and wild, but she was here, in this warm, safe room. She unpacked her bag. She put her few clothes into a small wooden chest at the foot of the bed. She took out the wooden box with the postcards and placed it on the table by the window. She took out the second postcard, the one with the bridge and the mountains, and propped it up against the window pane. The mountain on the postcard was the same mountain she could see from her window. The painting was a perfect, miniature version of the vast reality outside. After unpacking, she knelt by the fireplace. She had never made a fire before. She had only ever turned a dial on a heater in her city apartment. She struck a match. The flame flared up, bright and smelling of sulfur. She touched it to the small pieces of kindling. They caught fire slowly at first. Then, with a sudden whoosh of flame, the small fire began to crackle and spit. Soon the larger logs began to catch, and a deep, steady warmth began to spread out into the room. She sat on the floor in front of the fire for a long time, just watching the flames. The light flickered on her face and on the walls of the small room. The warmth soaked into her bones. She felt a deep, simple contentment. After a while, a knock came at the door. It was a soft, gentle knock. She got up and opened it. A young woman stood there. She had long, dark hair in a braid and was holding a wooden tray. "The innkeeper thought you might be hungry," she said with a shy smile. On the tray was a large earthenware bowl of steaming soup and a thick slice of dark bread. "Thank you so much," Clara said, surprised and touched by the kindness. She took the tray. "I'll bring the bowl down when you're finished," the young woman said, and then she was gone, her footsteps soft on the wooden stairs. Clara closed the door and carried the tray to the table by the window. She sat in the wooden chair, the warmth of the fire on her back and the vast, cold view of the mountains in front of her. The soup smelled amazing. It was a thick vegetable soup, full of potatoes and carrots and beans. Steam rose from it in a fragrant cloud. She took a spoonful. It was hot and hearty and incredibly flavorful. It tasted of the earth. It tasted of care. The bread was dark and dense and slightly sweet. She ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. The hot soup spread through her body, chasing away the last of the chill from her journey. It was more than just food. It was a welcome. It was warmth and nourishment and kindness, all in one simple bowl. When she finished, she felt warm and full and deeply content. She sat for a while longer, watching the light outside begin to change. The afternoon sun started to sink behind the high mountain peaks, and the deep blue of the sky began to soften to purple and pink. The snowy tops of the mountains glowed with a soft, rosy light. It was a beautiful, silent spectacle. As darkness fell, she felt a deep tiredness. It was the tiredness that comes after a long journey, after experiencing so many new things. She did not bother to light the lamp in her room. The flickering light from the fireplace was enough. She got into the bed and pulled the heavy wool blanket and the quilt up to her chin. The bed was firm, and the covers were heavy and comforting, like a gentle weight pressing down on her. The fire crackled softly in the fireplace. The room was completely quiet. There were no sounds from the village, no sounds from the inn, just the soft whisper of the fire. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, safe and warm in the heart of the mountains. Clara spent the next 2 days exploring the paths around Stone Hearth. She did not set out with a specific goal. She was not yet looking for the bridge, to feel the place, to breathe the mountain air. Each morning she would wake up in her cozy room. She would make a new fire and sit by it while she ate a simple breakfast of bread and cheese that she bought from the innkeeper. Then she would put on her sturdy shoes and her warm sweater and step out into the cold, crisp morning. The village of Stone Hearth was a starting point for many paths. They were not paved or marked with signs. They were just tracks in the earth, worn down by the footsteps of villagers over many years. Some paths led down, back into the pine forests. Others led up, toward the bare, rocky slopes above the village. Each day, she chose a different path. The first day, she chose a path that led down. It wound its way through the last of the houses, and then plunged into the dense pine forest. The air under the trees was still and cold, and smelled intensely of pine. The ground was soft under her feet, a thick carpet of fallen pine needles that muffled the sound of her footsteps. The light was dim and green, filtered through the thick branches high above. The world became a quiet, enclosed space. It was a world of tree trunks, straight and tall like the columns in a great cathedral. The only sounds were the soft sigh of the wind in the tops of the trees, a sound like a gentle, constant whisper, and the occasional sharp crack of a twig breaking under her feet. She walked for hours, just following the winding path. She saw no one. She felt completely alone, but not lonely. The forest was full of a quiet, living presence. She would stop and run her hand over the rough, scaly bark of a huge pine tree. She would pick up a pine cone from the ground and feel its perfect, intricate shape in her palm. It was a meditative walk. Her mind, usually so full of thoughts and plans, became as quiet as the forest around her. She was just a small, moving part of this great, silent wood. In the late afternoon, as the light began to fade, she would turn around and follow the path back up to the village. Emerging from the dimness of the forest into the open, bright light of the plateau always felt like waking up from a dream. The sight of the village with its solid stone houses and the welcoming plumes of smoke rising from its chimneys was a comforting sight. She would return to her warm room at the inn, her legs tired and her mind clear. She would build up the fire and sit by it, watching the mountains turn pink and gold in the setting sun. The second day, she chose a path that led up. This walk was very different. The path left the village and immediately began to climb. The air grew thinner and colder with every step. The trees became sparse, smaller and more twisted, clinging to the rocky ground. Soon, the trees disappeared altogether, and she was walking on open, rocky slopes. The world opened up. The views were immense. She could see for miles and miles. She could see the plateau where Stone Hearth sat, the village looking like a tiny collection of pebbles from up here. She could see the dark green blanket of the pine forest stretching out below, and all around her were the mountains. Peak after peak, a jagged, endless sea of gray rock and white snow stretching to the horizon. The silence up here was even deeper than in the forest. There was no whisper of wind in the trees. There was only the sound of the wind itself, a low, constant moan as it flowed over the bare rock. It was a lonely, wild sound. She found a sheltered spot behind a large boulder and sat for a long time, just looking. The sheer scale of the landscape was hard to comprehend. It made her feel very small, very insignificant, but it also made her feel a sense of freedom. Up here with nothing but rock and sky, her own small worries and thoughts seemed to fade away into nothing. She felt a connection to the vast, ancient stillness of the mountains. On the morning of the third day, Clara woke up with a new sense of purpose. She had explored the world around Stone Hearth. She had felt the quiet of the forest and the vastness of the high slopes. Now, she was ready to find the bridge. She remembered the sound she had heard when she first arrived at the station. The distant, rushing sound of a fast-moving river. She had not heard it in the village or on her walks. She realized it must be coming from one of the valleys that surrounded the plateau. She left the inn and stood in the middle of the village street. She closed her eyes and just listened. She blocked out the small sounds of the village, the distant chop of an axe, the lowing of a cow. She listened for something else, and then she heard it. A very faint, low, constant roar. It was coming from the east. She opened her eyes and looked in that direction. A path led that way, a path she had not yet taken. It seemed to lead toward a deep notch in the mountains that bordered the plateau. That was where she would go. She set off along the new path. It was a well-worn track that led her across the open, grassy plateau. The faint roar of the water grew slightly louder with every step. The path began to slope downward, leading her into the notch between the mountains. The air grew damper. She could smell the water now, a clean, cold, earthy smell. The sound was much louder, a constant, powerful rush. The path became steeper and rockier. She had to watch her footing carefully. It wound its way down the side of the valley, and the forest closed in around her again. These were not just pine trees. There were other trees here, leafy trees that grew close to the water. The sound of the river was a constant companion now, guiding her forward. After about an hour of walking downhill, she reached the bottom of the valley, and there was the river. It was exactly like the river in the postcard. It was not wide, but it was powerful. The water was crystal clear and very fast. It tumbled and crashed over a bed of large, smooth, gray stones, creating eddies of white foam. The sound was a deafening, continuous roar. It filled the whole valley. It was the sound of pure, raw energy. The path now turned to follow the bank of the river. Clara walked along the river's edge, mesmerized by the constant, chaotic movement of the water. The force of it was incredible. She could feel the spray on her face. The air was cold and damp. She followed the river as it twisted and turned through the narrow valley. The high, steep, forested walls of the valley rose up on either side of her, making her feel like she was in a deep, green canyon. She walked for another hour. She did not know how far she had gone. She was lost in the rhythm of walking and the roar of the water. She rounded a sharp bend in the river, pushing aside a low-hanging branch of a tree. And then she saw it. Up ahead, spanning the river in a single, perfect arc, was the bridge. Her heart gave a leap. It was real. It was here. It was exactly as it was in the painting. It was made of pale gray stone, the same color as the river boulders. It was old. Patches of bright green moss grew in the cracks between the stones. It looked as if it had been there forever, a natural part of the valley. It was simple and elegant and incredibly beautiful. She stood still for a long time, just looking at it. A feeling of triumph and wonder filled her. This strange journey she was on, following these painted clues, it was working. The postcards were leading her to real, secret, beautiful places. She walked slowly toward the bridge. As she got closer, she could see the craftsmanship. The stones were perfectly cut and fitted together. The arch was flawless. It was a work of art, a piece of human creation that was in perfect harmony with the wild nature around it. She stepped onto the bridge. The stone was solid and cool under her feet. She walked to the very center of the arch. She stood there, high above the rushing water. She leaned on the low stone parapet and looked down. The river roared and crashed beneath her. The power of it was dizzying. She looked up. The steep green walls of the valley surrounded her. The tall pine trees pointed to the small strip of blue sky visible above. The only sounds were the roar of the river and the whisper of the wind in the trees. It was a powerful, beautiful place. And then she remembered the clue. The single word on the back of the postcard, echo. She straightened up. She stood in the very middle of the bridge, in the center of the valley. The roar of the river was loud, but she felt a strange pocket of stillness around her. She took a deep breath of the cold, clean air. She was not sure what to say. She felt a little foolish, but she had come all this way. She had to try. She opened her mouth and called out a single, simple word. Hello. Her voice sounded small and thin against the great noise of the river. It seemed to be instantly swallowed up. She waited for a second. Nothing happened. She felt a little disappointed. Then she heard it. From the high rock walls of the valley opposite her, a sound came back. Hello. It was her own voice, but different. It was clear and pure, stripped of all effort. It was a perfect, faint copy. Then another sound came back from the other side of the valley. Hello. And another, fainter still, from further down the river. The mountain was talking back to her. Her small sound had been taken and turned into a chorus. It was not just a reflection of sound, it was an answer. She stood frozen on the bridge, listening. A feeling of pure joy, of pure wonder, washed over her. She laughed out loud, a sound of pure delight. And the valley laughed back, a series of soft, happy echoes. She understood the clue now. The echo was not just a physical thing. It was a feeling. It was the feeling of being heard. The feeling of making a sound in this vast, ancient place and having the place answer you. It was a connection, a conversation between her, one small person, and the immense silent mountains. She was not just an observer here. She was a participant. She was part of the place, and the place was part of her. She stayed on the bridge for a long time. She called out other words, simple words, peace, and her name came back to her on the wind. Clara, Clara. It was magical. Eventually, she walked off the bridge and found a large, flat, mossy rock on the riverbank. She sat down, her back against the cool stone. She did not want to leave. The postcard had led her here, but the feeling of the place was what would stay with her. She spent the rest of the day by the river. She did not do anything. She just sat and listened. She listened to the endless, powerful roar of the water. She listened to the whisper of the wind in the pines. She watched the light move across the valley. The sun passed over the narrow strip of sky, and the shadows of the high cliffs slowly crept across the forest on the other side. She watched a small brown bird with a bright yellow chest flit from branch to branch in a tree nearby. She watched a single red leaf float down the fast-moving river, spinning in the eddies before being swept away. Her mind was completely empty. There was no room for thoughts or worries. There was only the here and now. The sound of the river washed everything else away. It was a deep, cleansing peace. As dusk began to fall, and the valley filled with deep blue shadows, she knew it was time to go. She stood up and took one last look at the beautiful stone bridge. She turned and began the long walk back up to Stone Hearth. The climb was hard, but she felt light. She felt full of the energy of the river and the peace of the valley. When she finally reached her warm, cozy room at the inn, she did not immediately make a fire. She went to the window and looked out at the mountains. They were dark silhouettes against the star-filled sky. She felt a deep sense of gratitude to her great aunt, who had sent her on this journey, and to the mountains. It was another piece of the puzzle, another step on her path. She did not know where the next postcard would lead her, but she was ready. She was more than ready. I was excited. Chapter 5. The Journey to the City of Canals. Clara spent one last night in her cozy room at the inn. The fire in the small stone fireplace burned down to glowing red and orange embers, filling the room with a deep, steady warmth. Outside the small, thick window, the world was silent and still. The high mountain peaks were sharp, dark shapes against a sky filled with a breathtaking number of stars. The air was so clear and cold that the stars did not twinkle. They shone with a hard, brilliant light, like tiny chips of ice. Clara sat in the wooden chair by the window for a long time, wrapped in the heavy moss-colored blanket. She was not looking at any single star. She was just looking at the vastness of the night. She thought about the journey so far. She thought about the sea and the steady, comforting presence of Silas and his lighthouse. She thought about the mountains, the powerful roar of the river, and the magic of hearing her own voice come back to her from the ancient stone. Each place had given her a gift. The sea had given her a feeling of peace. The mountains had given her a feeling of awe. She wondered what the next place would bring. She knew it was time to leave. The feeling had come to her that afternoon as she sat by the river. It was the same quiet, insistent pull she had felt in Port Blossom, a feeling that her journey was not complete, a feeling that there was more to see, more to learn. She did not feel sad about leaving Stone Hearth. She felt a deep sense of gratitude. This place had been a part of her path, a beautiful and important part, but it was not the end of the path. She finally left the window and got into the wide, low bed. She pulled the heavy quilt up to her chin. The sheets were cold at first, but they quickly warmed to her body. The fire in the fireplace gave a soft sigh and settled into a quiet glow. She fell asleep listening to the profound silence of the mountain night. In the morning, she awoke to a room that was cold. The fire had gone out completely, leaving only a pile of gray ash in the fireplace. The first light of dawn was just beginning to touch the highest snow-covered peaks outside her window, painting them a soft, pale pink. She got out of bed and dressed quickly in the cold room, her breath making a small white cloud in front of her. She did not relight the fire. It was time to go. She packed her bag. The routine was becoming familiar. She folded her few items of clothing and placed them carefully inside. She took the wooden box from the table. She opened it and looked at the postcards, the lighthouse, the bridge. She ran her finger over the painted surfaces. They were more than just pictures now. They were proof. Proof that she had been to these places, that she was on this journey. She put them back and took out the third postcard. She had not looked at it closely yet. Now, in the clear morning light of the mountains, she studied it. The painting was very different from the first two. The first two had shown wild, natural landscapes. This one showed a place made by people. It was a painting of a tall, narrow house, painted a soft, buttery yellow. The house had a small, black iron balcony on the second floor. The balcony was overflowing with bright red flowers. The flowers were so vibrant, they seemed to be alive. Below the balcony, there was water. Not a wild sea or a rushing river, but a smooth, calm, green water. It looked still and deep. The painting was a close-up. It did not show the whole city, just this one small, perfect scene. It was intimate and peaceful. Clara turned the postcard over. There was the next train ticket, and below it, the single, neatly written word, reflection. Reflection. The word seemed to fit the painting. She imagined the yellow house and the red flowers would be reflected perfectly in the still green water below. But like the other words, she felt it must mean more. A reflection is a copy of something. It is what you see when you look in a mirror. Maybe this next place was a place for looking at herself. The thought made her feel a little nervous. It was easier to look at lighthouses and mountains than to look at yourself. She put the postcard carefully into the box, and the box into her bag. She took one last look around the small, cozy room that had been her safe haven. She left the heavy iron key on the table. She opened the door and stepped out into the dim hallway. The inn was quiet. It was still very early. She went down the creaking wooden stairs. The main room was empty. The giant fireplace was a black cavern filled with cold ash. The warm, welcoming heart of the inn was sleeping. The tall, bearded innkeeper was behind the bar, quietly wiping it down with a damp cloth. He looked up as she approached. He saw the bag in her hand. He did not say anything, but his eyes were kind. Clara put some money on the bar, enough for her room and the food she had eaten. The innkeeper nodded his thanks. "The train leaves soon," he said. It was not a question. People in this village seemed to know things without asking. "Yes," Clara said. "Thank you for your hospitality. Travel safe," he said. His voice was a low rumble in the quiet room. It was his version of a heartfelt goodbye. Clara turned and walked to the heavy oak door. She pulled it open and stepped outside. The cold mountain air hit her face. It felt like a final, clean goodbye from Stone Hearth. The walk to the station was beautiful. The sun was rising now, and the light was spreading down the mountain slopes, chasing the shadows away. The air was so crisp, it felt like it sparkled. Her footsteps were loud on the hard-packed earth of the empty street. She reached the station just as the train was pulling in. It was a different train again. It was longer than the two-carriage mountain train, but it looked just as solid and powerful. It was a train designed for a long journey, a journey that would cross different kinds of land. The train hissed and steamed in the cold air, its engine a low, powerful thrum. There were a few other people on the platform this morning. A family with two small children wrapped up in thick coats. An old man with a long walking stick. They were all waiting to descend from the high mountains to go back to the world below. The doors of the train opened. Clara found a seat by a window. The carriage was warm, and the seats were comfortable, covered in a practical, dark blue fabric. She put her bag on the seat beside her. Through the window, she looked at the village of Stone Hearth one last time. She saw the solid stone houses, the dark timber roofs, the thin plumes of smoke now rising from every chimney as the village woke up. Above it all, the great, silent mountains stood guard, their snowy peaks glowing in the morning sun. The train's whistle blew, a long, clear sound that echoed off the mountainside. With a gentle jolt, the train began to move. It pulled away from the station, away from the village. Clara watched until the houses were just small, dark specks, and then they were gone. The journey down had begun. For the first hour, the train moved slowly, carefully, retracing the path it had taken to climb. But the feeling was completely different. Going up had been a struggle. A fight against gravity. The engine had groaned with effort. Going down was a surrender. The engine was quiet. The main sound was the loud, repeated hiss of the brakes, a sound of controlled release. The train was letting go of the mountain, but carefully. The journey down offered new perspectives. She was looking at the landscape from a different angle. As the train wound its way down the steep slopes, she could see the high peaks she had been among yesterday now towering above her. They looked even bigger and more majestic from below. The train passed the bare, rocky slopes where she had walked. It crossed high trestle bridges over deep, empty valleys. Looking down was just as dizzying as it had been on the way up. She saw the forests of gnarled, twisted trees, and then the train plunged into the deep, dense pine forests. The world became dim and green again. The light filtered through the thick canopy of needles, creating shifting patterns on the floor of the carriage. The sharp, clean smell of pine filled the air once more. It was a farewell scent. The train was moving a little faster now, the descent becoming less steep. The hiss of the brakes was less frequent. The rumble of the wheels was a steady, soothing rhythm. Clara leaned her head against the cool glass of the window. She was not sad to be leaving the mountains. She carried the feeling of them inside her. The strength of the stone, the sound of the echo, they were part of her now. After a long time, she noticed a change in the light. It was becoming brighter. The dim green twilight of the pine forest was giving way to a warmer, more golden light. She looked out the window. The trees were changing. The tall, straight, dark green pines were becoming less frequent. They were being replaced by other kinds of trees. Trees with wide green leaves. Oak trees with their strong, spreading branches. Birch trees with their slender white trunks. The forest was becoming more open, more varied. The ground was no longer a solid carpet of brown pine needles. It was covered in green moss and ferns and patches of sunlight. The train was leaving the high-altitude world behind. It was entering a new kind of forest, a new kind of world. The slope of the land was much gentler now. The train moved more smoothly, with an easy, rolling motion. The air outside was changing too. She could feel it through the small gap at the top of the window. The cold, crisp, thin air of the mountains was gone. It was being replaced by a warmer, softer air, an air that felt thicker and heavier in her lungs. It was the air of the lowlands. The train came out of the forest completely. The change was sudden and dramatic. One moment, she was surrounded by trees. The next, the world opened up into a vast green landscape. The train had reached the bottom of the mountains. Behind her, the mountains rose up like a great dark wall. In front of her, the land was flat, completely flat, as far as she could see. The train picked up speed now. It was free from the difficult terrain of the mountains. It rushed forward, the wheels humming on the tracks. The rhythm was fast and smooth. It was a happy, energetic sound. Clara stared out the window, fascinated by this new world. After the enclosed valleys and towering peaks of the mountains, the flatness was a shock. The sky seemed huge, a great, pale blue dome that stretched from one horizon to the other. The land was a patchwork of brilliant greens. There were fields of bright new grass. There were meadows filled with yellow and white wildflowers. There were groves of leafy green trees, and there was water. There was water everywhere. She saw wide, slow-moving rivers, their surfaces like dark, smooth glass. The train crossed them on long, low bridges. She saw large, placid lakes, their shores lined with tall reeds that swayed in the gentle breeze. Small birds skimmed across the surface of the water. This was a wet, fertile, gentle land. It was the complete opposite of the hard, dry, rocky world of the mountains. The colors here were soft and bright. The lines were horizontal and gentle, not vertical and jagged. The feeling of the place was one of peace and abundance. It was a landscape that was easy to live in. She saw small farms with painted wooden houses and herds of fat, contented cows grazing in the fields. The whole world seemed to be sighing with contentment. Clara took out the third postcard again, the postcard of the yellow house and the green water. It made perfect sense now. This was the kind of landscape where such a place would exist, a place of calm water and gentle living. She held the postcard in her hand as the train sped through the flat green land. For hours, the scenery remained the same, an endless expanse of green fields, slow rivers, and calm lakes. It was not boring, it was deeply peaceful. It was a landscape that did not demand attention. It was a landscape that invited you to relax, to let your mind go still. Clara watched the clouds drift across the immense sky. She watched the reflections of the clouds in the still water of the lakes. The word reflection came back to her. This entire landscape was a world of reflections. The sky was reflected in the water. The trees were reflected in the water. Everything was doubled. Everything had a mirror image. The world above and the world below seemed to be in perfect harmony. The journey lasted for the rest of the day. The sun moved across the sky, and the light changed from the bright white of midday to the warm golden light of late afternoon. The shadows of the trees and the train itself grew long, stretching out across the green fields. Clara felt a deep sense of calm. The journey itself was becoming a destination for her. The time spent on the train, watching the world go by, was a precious time. It was a time of quiet observation, of simple being. There were no demands, no expectations. There was only the movement of the train and the changing world outside her window. As evening began to approach, she saw the first signs of a larger settlement. The small farms became more frequent. The houses were closer together. The train began to slow down. It passed through the outskirts of a city, but it was a city unlike her home city. There were no big factories with tall smokestacks. There were no vast areas of gray concrete buildings. The outskirts were green and filled with water. The houses were built along the banks of wide canals, each with its own small garden and a boat tied to a wooden dock. The city seemed to be woven into the watery landscape, not built on top of it. The train moved slowly now, its wheels clicking softly over the points in the track. It was approaching the main station. Clara looked out the window, trying to get a sense of this new place. She saw wide, tree-lined canals instead of roads. She saw people walking on stone paths that ran alongside the water. She saw long, elegant boats moving silently through the canals with no noisy engines. The air itself looked different. It seemed to be full of a soft, hazy light, a light that was reflected up from the surface of the water. The train glided into the station. The station was huge, a magnificent building of pale stone and glass with a high arched roof. It looked like a grand palace. But as the train came to a stop, Clara noticed something strange. The station was almost silent. In her home city, the main station was a place of constant noise. The roar of trains, the screech of brakes, the loud echoing announcements, the shouts of people. Here, there was only a low, gentle hum. The sounds were soft, the murmur of voices, the quiet footsteps of people on the stone floors, the gentle lapping of water from somewhere nearby. It was a city that whispered instead of shouted. The doors of the train opened. Clara stood up and took her bag. She felt a tingle of anticipation. This place felt completely new, completely different from anywhere she had ever been. She stepped off the train and onto the platform. The air that met her was warm and humid. It was thick with the smell of water and the sweet, heavy scent of flowers. It was a completely different atmosphere from the cold, clean air of the mountains. It was a soft, gentle air that wrapped around her like a damp blanket. She walked through the grand hall of the station. The ceilings were incredibly high, painted with frescoes of clouds and birds. The light streamed in through the huge glass windows, a soft, diffused light that made everything look gentle and dreamlike. There were many people in the station, but they moved slowly, without rushing. Their voices were low. The whole place had an atmosphere of calm and serenity. She walked out of the main entrance of the station. She stopped and she stared. The sight in front of her was so strange and beautiful, it did not seem real. There was no street. There was no wide road full of cars and buses. There was no traffic at all. Instead, there was a wide canal. The water was a calm, deep green, and the last light of the setting sun shimmered on its surface. Long, sleek boats, painted in bright colors, glided silently on the water, propelled by quiet electric motors. On either side of the canal were wide, stone walkways. People were strolling along the walkways, talking quietly, and all along the canal were tall, narrow houses, painted in a rainbow of soft colors: yellow, pink, blue, green. It was a city built on water, a city without the noise and rush of the modern world. Clara stood on the steps of the station, her small bag in her hand, and looked at this impossible, beautiful city. She understood now why the postcard had shown a house by the water. In this city, every house was a house by the water. Her search for the house with the red flowers was about to begin. But first, she just wanted to stand here on the edge of this new world and breathe in the scent of water and flowers and listen to the gentle, lapping sound of a city that lived in perfect harmony with its watery soul. This was Veridia, the city of reflections. Chapter 6: The City of Water and Reflections. Clara stood on the wide stone steps outside the grand station of Veridia. The city spread out before her, a sight so different from anything she had ever known that it felt like a dream. There was no roar of traffic, no smell of exhaust fumes, no impatient sound of car horns. There was only the vast open space of the wide canal, the quiet glide of boats, and the soft, lapping sound of water against stone. The air was warm and smelled of damp earth, sweet flowers, and the water itself. The sun was setting, and the sky was a soft canvas of pink and orange. This light was reflected in the still surface of the canal, so the water seemed to be glowing from within. The city was a world of doubles, a world of reflections. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the gentle, humid air. Her journey from the sharp, cold, solid world of the mountains to the soft, warm, liquid world was complete. It felt like she had traveled between two completely different planets. She needed to find a place to stay. She looked at the tall, narrow houses that lined the canal. They were painted in a beautiful palette of soft colors. A pale rose-colored house stood next to a house the color of a dusty blue sky. Next to that was one the color of fresh mint. Their reflections shimmered and trembled in the water below. The straight lines of the buildings turned into soft, wavering ribbons of color. She saw no signs for hotels or inns. This city kept its secrets well. She decided to walk. She picked up her small bag, which suddenly felt heavy and out of place in this light, airy city, and started to walk along the wide stone path to the left of the station. The walkway was crowded with people, but it was a gentle, slow-moving crowd. People strolled. They did not rush. They talked in low, calm voices. Their footsteps made soft, shuffling sounds on the stone. The atmosphere was one of profound peace. She walked past small cafes where people sat at little tables right by the water's edge, drinking from small cups and watching the boats go by. She passed shops with large windows displaying beautiful objects made of colored glass, for which the city was famous. Vases and bowls and delicate animal figures sparkled in the evening light. She walked for a long time, crossing over a beautiful arched stone bridge to the other side of the main canal. The bridge was high, and from its center, she could look down the long, straight waterway. The setting sun was at the far end, turning the water into a river of liquid gold. Long, sleek black boats, like the one she had seen in her dream of the city, glided silently beneath her, steered by men standing at the back with a single long oar. She continued her walk, turning away from the grand main canal into a smaller, narrower one. Here, the houses were just as tall and colorful, but they were closer together. The canal was more intimate. The sounds were different too. She could hear the soft splash of water from a small fountain hidden in a tiny courtyard. She could hear the faint sound of music, a single violin playing a sad, sweet melody, coming from an open window high above. She felt like she was walking through the city's private rooms, seeing its secret, quiet life. She looked at the windows of the houses as she walked. She was looking for a sign, any sign that might offer a room. She saw windows filled with plants. She saw windows with cats sleeping on the sills. She saw windows with their shutters closed tight, but she saw no signs. As the last of the light faded from the sky and the stars began to appear, the city transformed again. Yellow lights bloomed in the windows of the houses. Lamps along the canals flickered on, their soft glow illuminating the stone walkways and casting long, trembling reflections on the dark water. The city at night was even more magical than during the day. It was a place of warm light and dark, mysterious water. She was starting to feel tired. Her legs ached from the long walk. She was about to turn back toward the station, to a more public area where she might find a hotel, when she saw it. It was a very small, simple, hand-painted sign hanging in the window of a tall, dark blue house. The sign just had one word on it: camera. It meant room. It was a simple, unassuming sign, easy to miss. Clara felt a surge of relief. A single lamp on the opposite bank cast a gentle pool of light on the water. She walked to the front door, a heavy wooden door painted a deep green. She lifted the brass knocker, shaped like a fish, and let it fall. The sound was loud in the quiet street. After a moment, she heard footsteps inside. The door opened a crack. An old woman peered out. She was small, with a cloud of white hair and a face full of deep, kind wrinkles. She looked at Clara, then at her bag, and she seemed to understand everything in an instant. She opened the door wider. "Entra," she said, her voice a soft, raspy whisper. "Come in." Clara stepped inside. The house was narrow and smelled of old wood, beeswax, and something else, a faint, clean smell like lavender. The hallway was dark, lit only by a single small lamp on a table. The old woman led her up a steep, narrow, winding staircase. The wooden steps were worn into smooth hollows in the middle from centuries of use. They creaked softly under their feet. On the third floor, the woman stopped at a door. She opened it and motioned for Clara to go inside. The room was small and simple, but it was perfect. The walls were painted a soft, pale gray. The floor was made of wide, dark wooden planks. There was a simple bed with a white linen cover, a small dark wood wardrobe, and a single wooden chair. But the main feature of the room was the window. It was a large window made of two tall glass doors that opened inward. They led to a tiny stone balcony, just big enough for one person to stand on. The balcony looked directly out over the quiet canal. Clara walked to the window and stepped out onto the balcony. The cool night air touched her face. Below her, the dark water of the canal flowed silently. The light from the lamp on the opposite bank cast a wavering golden path across the surface. She could see the reflection of the stars in the water. The city was silent. She could hear the gentle, constant lapping of the water against the foundations of the house. It was a sound that was so soft, so peaceful, it was almost not a sound at all. It was the city's quiet heartbeat. "Va bene?" the old woman asked from the doorway. "Is it okay?" Clara said, turning around. "E bellissima, it is beautiful." She did not know where the Italian words came from. They just seemed to be the right words for this place. The old woman smiled, a warm, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of her eyes. She told Clara the price for the room. It was very reasonable. Clara paid her for a week. She knew she would need time to explore this city. The woman nodded, gave her the key, and left, closing the door softly behind her. Clara was alone in her room. She did not unpack her bag. She went back out onto the small balcony and stood there for a long time, looking out at the water and the night. She felt a profound sense of peace. This was her place in this city. This small room, this little balcony, was her anchor. From here, she could watch the life of the canal unfold. From here, she could begin her search. The next morning, she woke up to a room filled with a soft, gray light. The light in this city was different. It was not the sharp, direct light of the mountains. It was a gentle, diffused light, reflected up from the water, that seemed to come from all directions at once. It made everything look soft and dreamlike. She got dressed and went outside. She had no plan, no map. She decided that for the first few days, she would just walk. She would let the city lead her. She wanted to get lost in its maze of canals and walkways. She bought a piece of warm bread from a tiny bakery she found in a small square. She ate it as she walked, the simple taste of it grounding her in this new reality. For 3 days, she walked. The city of Viridia was a labyrinth. You had to learn it with your feet. The city was made up of many small islands, connected by hundreds of bridges. Each bridge was different. Some were high, graceful stone arches that offered beautiful views of the canals. Some were simple, flat wooden planks that seemed to bounce slightly as you walked over them. Some were ornate, with iron railings shaped into intricate floral patterns. Crossing a bridge was like moving from one world to another. Each small island had its own character, its own atmosphere. She walked through wide, sunny squares, bustling with people and pigeons. These squares were the city's living rooms, where people gathered to talk and drink coffee. She walked through narrow, dark alleyways, where the tall houses on either side almost touched, and the sky was just a thin blue slit far above. In these alleyways, the only sound was her own footsteps echoing on the stones. She discovered that the city had 2 levels: the level of the stone walkways, the world of people, and the level of the water, the world of boats. The lives of these 2 worlds were intertwined, but separate. From a bridge, she would watch the boats pass below. There were the long, elegant black boats, the gondolas, with their graceful, silent movement. There were larger, more practical boats that acted as the city's buses, the vaporettos, moving people from one part of the city to another. There were delivery boats, piled high with boxes of vegetables, or building supplies, or even furniture. Everything that a city needed was moved by water. It was a slow, quiet, efficient dance. She spent hours just watching. She would find a quiet spot on the steps of a canal and just sit. She watched the light change on the water. In the morning, the water was often a murky, mysterious green. In the bright sun of midday, it could be a sparkling turquoise. In the evening, it reflected the colors of the sunset, turning to orange and pink and deep purple. The water was the city's soul. It was constantly changing, yet always there. She listened to the sounds of the city. The most constant sound was the lapping of water. But there were other sounds too. The musical cry of a gondolier warning someone as he turned a blind corner. The distant, beautiful chiming of church bells, a sound that seemed to hang in the damp air. The chatter of birds, the murmur of conversations in a language she was beginning to understand. The lack of engine noise was what made the city so peaceful. Without the constant roar of traffic, all the small, gentle sounds of life could be heard. She began to feel the rhythm of the city. It was a slow, gentle rhythm, dictated by the movement of the water and the pace of walking. No one rushed, there was no need to. The city encouraged a slow, observant way of being. Her own hurried city pace began to fall away. She started to walk more slowly. She started to notice small details she would have missed before. A beautiful carved stone face on the corner of a building. A tiny garden full of flowers, hidden away in a secret courtyard. A flight of stone steps leading directly down into the green water of a canal, worn smooth by centuries of use. The city revealed its beauty slowly to those who were willing to look. Every evening, she would return to her small room. She would stand on her balcony and watch the night fall over her quiet canal. She would see her neighbor across the way, an old man, come out onto his own balcony to water his plants. They would nod to each other in a silent, neighborly greeting. She felt a part of this quiet corner of the city. She felt at home. On the fourth day, she decided it was time to begin her real search. She had been wandering aimlessly. Now she needed to be more systematic. She took the postcard from its box. She sat on her bed and studied it again. The tall, narrow yellow house, the balcony with the bright red flowers, the calm green water. It could be anywhere in this city of thousands of houses and canals. She decided to create a plan. She would choose one section of the city each day and walk every single one of its canals, looking for the yellow house. It was a huge task, but it was the only way. She started with the area around her own room. She walked up and down the familiar canals, but this time with a new focus. She was not just absorbing the atmosphere, she was searching. She looked at every house, comparing it to the image in her mind. She saw pink houses and blue houses and orange houses. She saw houses with balconies and houses without. She saw balconies with green plants and balconies with no plants at all. But she did not see the yellow house with the red flowers. The next day, she explored a different part of the city, a quieter, more residential area, far from the main tourist paths. Here, the canals were narrower and the houses were smaller. She saw laundry hanging on lines strung between the buildings, bright splashes of color against the old stone. She saw children playing a game with a ball in a small, hidden square. She felt like she was seeing the real, everyday life of the city, but still, she did not find the house. Day after day, she continued her search. It became her daily meditation, walking, looking, observing. She never got tired of it. Every day was a new discovery. Every canal held a new, beautiful view. The search itself became a joy. She was seeing the city in a way that a normal visitor never would. She was learning its secret corners, its hidden pathways, its quiet moments. She was building her own personal map of Viridia in her mind. One afternoon, after almost a week of searching, she was feeling a little discouraged. She had walked for hours. Her feet were tired. She had explored a whole new section of the city, a tangle of tiny, winding canals, but she had found nothing. She decided to give up for the day and head back to her room. She was on her way back, taking a route she thought she knew, when she took a wrong turn. She found herself in a small alleyway she had never seen before. It ended at a small, low bridge she did not recognize. She sighed. She was lost again, but she was not annoyed. Being lost in Viridia was part of the experience. She crossed the small bridge, and then she stopped. She was standing in a small, quiet square she had never seen before. It was completely deserted. The stones of the square were covered in a fine green moss. In the center, a single old tree grew. It was a place that felt forgotten by time, and across the square there was a canal. A small, still silent canal. The water was a deep, dark green, and on the other side of the canal stood a tall, narrow house. It was painted a soft, buttery yellow. The paint was old and peeling in places. On the second floor, there was a small black iron balcony, and the balcony was overflowing with bright, vibrant, brilliant red flowers. Clara's heart stopped. She could not breathe. It was the house. It was the house from the postcard. It was exactly as it had been painted. The color of the house, the shape of the balcony, the riot of red flowers. Everything was perfect. She stood frozen in the forgotten square, just staring. A feeling of immense quiet joy spread through her. It was a feeling of finding something that was meant for her, a feeling of a deep, secret connection to her great aunt, who had somehow known about this hidden, perfect place. The place was even more beautiful in reality than in the painting. The painting had captured the image, but it had not captured the feeling of deep, profound peace. The silence here was absolute. There was no sound of boats, no voices, no bells, only the quiet whisper of the wind in the leaves of the old tree. She walked slowly across the square to the edge of the canal. She stood there for a long time, just looking at the house, and then she looked down at the water, and she understood the clue: reflection. The water in this forgotten canal was perfectly still, like a dark green mirror, and in it, the reflection of the house was perfect. She could see the yellow walls. She could see the black iron balcony. She could see every single red flower, a perfect upside-down image, shimmering slightly in the still water. The reflection was as clear and as real as the house itself. It was a world within a world, a perfect, silent copy. She understood that the clue was about this physical reflection, this breathtaking sight, but she also felt it was about something more. This quiet, forgotten, beautiful place was a place for inner reflection, a place to be still and look at yourself. The next day, Clara knew what she had to do. She wanted to see the house not from the land, but from the water. She wanted to be part of the reflection. She found a place near her room that rented small, simple boats. Not gondolas, but small, flat-bottomed rowboats, the kind the local people used. She rented one for the day. It was a simple wooden boat with a single paddle. She felt a little clumsy at first. Paddling a boat through the canals of Viridia was harder than it looked. She had to learn how to steer, how to turn corners, how to avoid bumping into the stone walls. But after a while, she got into a rhythm. The gentle dip and pull of the paddle, the soft splash of the water, the smooth glide of the boat. It was a wonderful way to see the city. From the water level, the city looked completely different. The houses seemed to tower over her. The bridges became low, dark tunnels that she had to duck under. She was in the city's other world, the world of the water. She felt a new sense of freedom and anonymity. She paddled for hours, exploring canals she had not seen before. Then, using her new mental map, she began to navigate toward the forgotten square. It was difficult. She had to remember the turns, the bridges. She got lost a few times, ending up in dead-end canals. But finally, she found it. She paddled under the small, low bridge and emerged into the silent canal. She let the boat drift to a stop in the middle of the still green water. She laid the paddle down. The boat floated in perfect silence, and there in front of her was the yellow house, and below it, its perfect reflection. She was floating on the mirror. She was part of the painting. She was inside the postcard. A feeling of deep, profound peace and stillness settled over her. It was a different kind of peace from the peace of the sea, that had been a piece of steady, rhythmic power. This was a piece of absolute, silent stillness. She sat in the boat for what felt like hours, not moving, not thinking. She just watched the house and its reflection. She watched her own reflection in the dark water, a blurry, wavering shape. She thought about her journey. She thought about the person she had been in the dusty library, a person who lived a small, ordered, contained life. And she thought about the person she was becoming, a person who followed mysterious clues, who traveled to new worlds, who found joy in getting lost. The city of reflections had shown her a beautiful image on the water, but it had also shown her a reflection of herself, and she was beginning to like the person she saw. Chapter 7. The Train into the Great Forest. Clara woke on her last morning in Viridia to the sound of water. It was not a loud sound. It was the soft, gentle lapping of the canal against the stone foundations of the house. It was a sound that had become the background music to her life for the past week. It was the city's quiet heartbeat, and she had grown to love its slow, peaceful rhythm. She lay in her simple bed for a while, just listening. The light that filled her room was soft and gray, a light reflected from the water and the sky. It was a gentle light, a light without sharp edges. She thought about the postcard, the yellow house, and the still green water. She had found it. She had found that perfect secret place. And she had found the meaning of the word reflection. It was the perfect image in the water, but it was also the quiet stillness that the city gave her, a stillness that allowed her to see herself more clearly. She felt a sense of deep gratitude for this beautiful, liquid city. It had washed her clean. It was time to go. The familiar pull was there, a quiet but insistent tug, telling her that her journey was not over. There were more postcards in the wooden box. There were more places waiting for her. She got out of bed and walked onto the small stone balcony. The morning air was cool and damp. Her quiet little canal was still asleep. The water was a dark, smooth mirror. She watched a single leaf float by, a tiny boat on a silent green sea. She felt a sense of peace, not sadness. She was ready for the next part of her journey. She packed her small bag. The movements were automatic now, a familiar ritual. She folded her clothes neatly. She placed the wooden box in the center of the bag, a precious, heavy heart. Before she closed the box, she took out the fourth postcard. She had only glanced at it before. Now, she took the time to truly see it. The painting was of a single, immense tree. It was an oak tree, she thought. Its trunk was huge, wider than a person, and its bark was gnarled and thick, like the wrinkled skin of an ancient creature. Its branches were enormous, spreading out so wide they seemed to hold up the sky. The leaves were a deep, dark green. In the painting, sunlight was filtering down through the leaves, creating a pattern of bright light and deep shadow on the ground below. The tree felt alive. It felt powerful. It felt old, older than anything she had ever seen. She turned the postcard over. There was the train ticket, and beneath it, the single word, written in the beautiful, flowing script of her great-aunt. The word was breath. Breath, she said the word softly. It was a simple, essential word. It was the first thing you did when you were born, and the last thing you did when you left. It was the air going in and out. It was the rhythm of life itself. She looked back at the painting of the giant tree. Did a tree breathe? She supposed it did, in its own way. It took in the air and gave back life. Maybe this next place was a place about life, about the simple, essential act of being alive. She placed the postcard back in the box and closed the lid. She took her bag and the key to the room. She went downstairs. The old woman who owned the house was in the small, dark kitchen at the back of the hallway, polishing a small silver cup. She looked up as Clara approached. She saw the bag and she understood. She did not look surprised. She simply wiped her hands on her apron and came to meet Clara in the hallway. Clara held out the key and the money for her last night's stay. The old woman took them with her small, wrinkled hand. She looked at Clara with her dark, kind eyes. "Vaya con pace," she said. "Go with peace, grazie," Clara said. "Per tutto, thank you for everything." The old woman smiled, a small, sad, beautiful smile. She opened the heavy front door for Clara. Clara stepped out into the cool morning air of the quiet street. The door closed softly behind her, the sound of the latch clicking into place. She did not walk to the station. She had decided to make her final journey through the city by water. She walked to the place where she had rented the small rowboat the day before. The man remembered her and smiled. She rented the boat for 1 hour. She got in, the boat rocking gently as she found her balance. She took the paddle and pushed off from the stone steps. She paddled out into the canal. The city was just beginning to wake up. People were opening their shutters. The smell of strong coffee drifted from the open doorways of cafes. Delivery boats, low in the water and piled high with goods, moved slowly through the main canals, their electric motors making a soft, low hum. Clara paddled slowly, not with the purpose of a search, but with the gentle pace of a farewell. She saw the city from the water's level, one last time. The tall, colorful houses looked like cliffs rising up from the sea. The bridges were dark, low caves she had to pass through. She felt like a quiet observer, moving through the city's secret, watery veins. She paddled all the way to the Grand Canal that ran in front of the station. She returned the boat at a small dock near the station steps. She thanked the man and walked up the wide steps into the magnificent, quiet station. She found the platform for her train. It was a different platform, in a part of the station she had not seen before. It felt smaller, more functional. The train was waiting. It looked very different from the other trains she had taken. It was much older. It was made almost entirely of wood. The carriages were a dark, weathered green, the color of moss. The paint was peeling in places. The engine was small and black, and it looked like a hard-working, tired old animal. A thin plume of steam rose from its chimney. A simple sign on the side of the engine read the forest line. This train had only one purpose: to go into the forest. Clara climbed the wooden steps into a carriage. The inside was even more surprising. The entire carriage was paneled in dark, smooth wood. The seats were simple wooden benches. The luggage racks were wooden shelves. The floor was made of wide wooden planks, scrubbed clean but stained with age. The whole carriage smelled of wood, a faint, sweet, resinous scent, mixed with the smell of coal, smoke, and damp earth. It was like stepping inside a tree. The carriage was almost empty. There were only 2 other passengers: an old man with a long white beard, sitting by himself and staring out the window, and a young woman with a sketchbook in her lap, her pencil moving quickly as she drew something Clara could not see. Clara chose a bench by a window, halfway down the carriage. She sat down and put her bag beside her. The wooden bench was hard but comfortable in its own way. It felt solid and real. A loud, long whistle blew, a surprisingly powerful sound from such a small engine. The train gave a great shudder, a jolt that ran through the whole carriage. With a series of loud clanks and groans, it began to move. It pulled slowly out of the grand station of Viridia. Clara looked out the window. She saw the beautiful, soft-colored houses slide by. She saw the calm green water of the canals. She saw the elegant stone bridges. The train moved through the green, watery outskirts of the city. Then the city was gone. The train moved out into the flat, open lowlands. For an hour, she saw the familiar landscape of green fields and slow-moving rivers. The sky was wide and pale blue. It was a peaceful, gentle world. Then, in the far distance, she saw it, a dark line on the horizon. At first, it was just a thin, dark green stripe, between the green of the fields and the blue of the sky. But as the train traveled on, the line grew thicker and taller. It was a wall of trees, a vast, unbroken forest that stretched as far as she could see in either direction. The train was heading directly for it. It was not going around it. It was going into it. As the train got closer, the scale of the forest became clear. It was immense. The trees at the edge were tall, but behind them rose even taller trees, creating a solid, dark wall of green. It looked like the edge of the world. The train did not slow down. It rolled steadily toward the dark wall. Clara felt a thrill of anticipation. She was about to enter a new world. The moment the train entered, the forest was sudden and absolute. 1 second, the carriage was filled with the bright, open light of the lowlands. The next second, it was plunged into a deep, green twilight. The sun was gone, blocked by the thick canopy of leaves high above. The air in the carriage seemed to change. The light was now the color of moss, the color of deep water. It was a soft, dim, underwater light. The sounds changed to the sound of the train. The steady clatter of the wheels on the track became muffled, softer. The trees seemed to absorb the sound, to swallow it. The world outside the window was a constant moving wall of green and brown. An endless procession of tree trunks, thick and straight, slid past her window. The forest floor was a deep, dark carpet of fallen leaves and ferns. Everything was green. So many different shades of green. The dark green of the oak leaves, the bright, fresh green of the ferns, the pale, silvery green of the moss that covered the tree trunks. The train track cut a narrow path through this overwhelming world of green. The train itself felt like a small, brave creature, making its slow way through a place where it did not really belong. The journey continued for hours. There was no change in the scenery, just trees, endless trees. After a while, it became hypnotic. The steady, slow clatter of the train, the endless, shifting patterns of green and brown outside the window. Her mind began to slow down. She stopped thinking and just watched. She began to notice small details, the way the thick, gray bark of a beech tree looked almost like skin, the way a patch of sunlight would suddenly break through the canopy, lighting up a small section of the forest floor like a spotlight on a stage, revealing a cluster of tiny white mushrooms or a single perfect red flower. Then the train would move on, and the spotlight would be gone, the forest floor returning to its deep green shadow. The train moved very slowly. It was not a journey of speed, but of endurance. Sometimes the train would stop for no reason at all. It would just sit, motionless and silent, in the middle of the immense forest. The engine would fall quiet, its steam hissing softly. And in those moments of absolute silence, Clara could hear the forest. It was not a loud sound. It was a collection of tiny, secret sounds. The soft plop of a single leaf falling onto the damp earth. The rustle of some small, unseen creature in the undergrowth. The faint, high-pitched hum of insects. The slow drip of water from a mossy branch onto a stone. The silence of the forest was not an empty silence. It was a silence that was full of life. A quiet, patient, ancient life. During one of these stops, she looked out her window. A huge tree stood right next to the track. Its bark was covered in a thick, velvety blanket of moss. A shaft of sunlight came down through the leaves and lit up the moss. It glowed with an almost magical, emerald green light. She pressed her hand against the cool glass of the window, as if she could feel the texture of the moss, the life of the tree. The train gave a lurch and started moving again, and the glowing tree was left behind. The air in the carriage grew cooler. The smell of damp earth and rotting leaves became stronger. It was a rich, deep, fertile smell. The smell of life and death and life again, a cycle that had been going on in this forest for thousands of years. Clara felt a sense of being very small, very young. This forest was ancient. Some of the trees she was seeing were hundreds, maybe even thousands of years old. They had been standing here long before her city was built, long before her great-aunt was born. They would still be standing here long after she was gone. The thought was not sad. It was humbling. It put her own small life into perspective. She was just a brief visitor passing through this immense, timeless place. The afternoon light began to fade, but inside the forest it was hard to tell. The light had been dim all day. Now it just became a deeper, darker shade of green. The other passengers in the carriage were quiet. The old man was asleep, his white beard resting on his chest. The young woman had put her sketchbook away and was now just staring out the window, her face full of a quiet wonder, just like Clara's. The train and its few passengers were like a small seed pod, being carried through the heart of this giant living thing. The train began to slow down. The steady clatter of the wheels became a slow, deliberate clank. Clank, clank. Clara looked ahead. Through the trees, she could see a change in the light. It was not the open light of the outside world. It was just a slightly brighter patch of green. The train moved toward it. It emerged from the dense wall of trees into a large, circular clearing. The train's brakes hissed a loud sound in the quiet air. The train shuddered to a stop. This was the end of the line. Clara looked out the window. She was not at a station. There was no building, no sign, no platform made of concrete or stone. There was just a simple, low platform made of heavy wooden planks, gray and weathered with age. The platform sat in the middle of a wide clearing, surrounded on all sides by the towering, silent wall of the forest. The trees that ringed the clearing were the biggest she had ever seen. They were giants. Their trunks were massive, and their branches, high above, formed a roof over the clearing. The sky was not a wide open bowl. It was a small circle of pale blue, visible through the hole in the green ceiling. The train's engine fell silent. The profound silence of the forest rushed in to fill the space. Clara stood up and took her bag. The old man and the young woman also stood up. They were the only people getting off here. She walked to the door of the carriage and stepped down onto the wooden platform. The air that met her was cool and still and heavy. It was thick with the smell of damp earth, moss, and leaves. It was an air that felt ancient, an air that had been trapped under the trees for centuries. It felt like she was breathing in the forest itself. The train did not wait. As soon as the 3 passengers were on the platform, its whistle blew, a soft, mournful sound that was quickly absorbed by the trees. With a slow groan, it began to move. It did not turn around. It simply started to go backward, retreating along the same narrow track it had used to arrive. It slid back into the dark wall of trees and was gone. Clara stood on the platform with the 2 other people. They were all silent for a long moment, as if adjusting to the immense quiet of the place. Then, the old man nodded to her, a slow, gentle gesture. The young woman gave her a small, shy smile. Then they both turned and walked off the platform, following a narrow dirt path that led away from the tracks. Clara watched them go. They disappeared into the trees on the other side of the clearing, and then she was alone. Completely alone. The silence was absolute. It was a silence so deep it seemed to have weight. It pressed in on her from all sides. It was not an empty silence. She could feel the presence of the giant trees all around her. She could feel the immense, quiet life of the forest. She stood on the platform for a long time, just breathing. She breathed in the cool, damp, earthy air. She breathed out. The simple act of breathing felt different here. It felt more important, more deliberate. Each breath was a connection to this vast, living place. This must be the start of what the postcard meant. Breath. She looked around the clearing. A narrow path, the same one the others had taken, led from the platform toward a small cluster of buildings nestled at the edge of the clearing, right at the base of the giant trees. This must be the village Oakhaven. It was the smallest village she had ever seen. There were maybe only 10 or 12 houses in total. They were not made of stone or painted plaster. They were made entirely of wood, dark, weathered wood. The houses were low and small, with roofs covered in a thick green carpet of moss. They did not look like they had been built on the land. They looked like they had grown out of the forest floor, like a strange kind of mushroom. Smoke curled from a few of the small stone chimneys, rising straight up into the still air. The village looked like it was sleeping. It was a place that seemed to belong to a different time, a different world. It was a place that had learned to live in the shadow of the great trees, to be quiet, to be small. Clara picked up her bag. She stepped off the wooden platform and onto the soft, dark earth of the path. She walked slowly toward the tiny, silent village of wood and moss, a small human figure in a world of giant, breathing trees. Chapter 8. The Hamlet of Roots and Leaves. The path from the wooden platform to the village of Oakhaven was made of dark, soft earth. It was not a path that had been cut or paved. It was a path that had been created by footsteps over many, many years. It was soft under Clara's shoes, and her steps made no sound. The air was cool and still, and smelled of damp soil and moss and the deep, rich scent of decaying leaves. It was the smell of the forest floor, a smell of constant, slow transformation. As she walked toward the small cluster of wooden houses, the scale of the trees around her became even more apparent. They were giants. Their trunks were massive, gnarled columns of wood, covered in thick, furrowed bark. Their lower branches were as thick as the trunks of normal trees. High above, their leaves formed a dense green canopy that almost completely blocked the sky. The light in the clearing was a dim, green underwater light. It was a place of deep shadow and profound quiet. The village itself was a collection of small, low buildings huddled together at the edge of the clearing. They looked as if they were seeking shelter from the immense forest. The houses were made of dark, weathered wood, the same color as the tree trunks. The roofs were covered in a thick, velvety layer of bright green moss, so they looked like small green hills. The windows were small, and the doors were low. Everything about the village was designed to be unobtrusive, to blend in. It was a place that did not try to fight the forest, but to live with it, as a small part of it. As Clara entered the village, she saw the young woman from the train. She was sitting on the wooden steps of one of the small houses, her sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing one of the giant trees, her pencil moving with quick, sure strokes. She looked up as Clara approached and gave her another shy smile. She pointed to a slightly larger house in the center of the village. "You can ask there," she said, her voice a soft whisper, as if she did not want to disturb the silence. For a place to stay, Clara thanked her with a nod and a smile of her own. The village seemed to be a place of few words. She walked to the house the young woman had indicated. It was a little bigger than the others, with a wider door. The door was open. She stepped inside. The interior was dark and cool. The walls were made of rough, unpainted wooden planks. The air smelled of dried herbs and wood smoke. The room was a single large space, filled with shelves. The shelves were packed with jars of all shapes and sizes, filled with dried leaves, flowers, roots, and berries. Bunches of dried herbs hung from the low ceiling beams, filling the air with their complex, earthy scents. It was a shop, an apothecary, a place of forest medicine. At the back of the room, an old woman was sitting in a wooden rocking chair by a small, cold fireplace. She was not rocking, she was just sitting, perfectly still, her hands resting in her lap. She had long white hair braided into a single thick plait that reached her waist. Her face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, and her eyes were a very dark, almost black color. They were calm and knowing eyes. She watched Clara enter, her expression unchanging. She did not seem surprised to see a stranger. Clara felt that very little would surprise this woman. "I am looking for a place to stay," Clara said. Her voice sounded loud in the quiet, herb-scented room. The old woman did not answer immediately. She just looked at Clara, a long, steady gaze that seemed to see right through her. Clara stood still, waiting. She had the feeling that this was a test of her patience. Finally, the old woman spoke. Her voice was low and crackly, like dry leaves skittering on the ground. "There is a cabin," she said, "at the edge of the village. It is empty. You can stay there." She did not ask for money. She did not ask how long Clara would stay. She simply offered the cabin. It was a gift, given freely. "Thank you," Clara said. The old woman gave a slow, slight nod. She pointed a long, thin finger toward the back of the shop. "The path behind the house," she said. "Follow it to the last cabin. The door is not locked." And that was all. The conversation was over. The old woman closed her eyes, as if returning to her deep, quiet thoughts. Clara knew she was dismissed. She walked out of the shop and back into the green twilight of the village. She found the path behind the old woman's house. It was another narrow, soft dirt track that led away from the central clearing and deeper into the shadow of the trees. The path led her past a few other small wooden cabins. They were all quiet. There were no sounds coming from them. A thin wisp of smoke rose from one of the chimneys. A pile of neatly chopped firewood was stacked against the wall of another. The people of this village lived quiet, simple lives, hidden away in their small wooden shells. She came to the last cabin on the path. It was small, even smaller than the others. It stood right at the edge of the forest, with the great, dark wall of trees rising up directly behind it. It had a small porch with a single wooden chair on it. It looked like a very lonely place, but also a very peaceful one. She stepped onto the porch. The wooden planks were smooth and worn. She pushed open the door, which was, as the old woman had said, unlocked. The cabin was a single, small room. It was very simple. There was a low bed in one corner, with a simple wool blanket folded neatly on it. There was a small, rough wooden table and a single stool. In the corner was a small iron stove for heat and cooking, with a pile of wood beside it. The cabin was clean, but not empty. It felt like someone had just left. On the small table, there was a single white ceramic mug and a wooden bowl. On a shelf on the wall, there were a few books with worn, soft covers. It was a place that had been lived in, a place that held the quiet presence of its previous occupant. Clara put her bag on the floor. She went to the single small window and looked out. The window did not look back toward the village. It looked directly into the forest. The view was of the massive, moss-covered trunk of a giant tree, only a few feet from the cabin. The window framed a small part of the immense tree, a living painting of bark and moss and shadow. She felt like she was living inside the forest, not just next to it. She unpacked her few things. It did not take long. She put her clothes in a small wooden chest at the foot of the bed. She placed the wooden box with her postcards on the table. She took out the fourth postcard, the one of the giant oak tree, and propped it up on the windowsill. The tree in the painting looked like it could be the very tree that stood outside her window. This place was a perfect match for the image on the card. She spent the rest of the day settling in. She explored her small cabin. She ran her hand over the rough wood of the walls. She looked at the titles of the books on the shelf. They were books about trees. As evening approached, the clearing outside grew darker. The small patch of sky visible through the canopy of leaves turned from pale blue to a deep, dark purple. A profound silence fell over the forest. Clara felt a little cold. She decided to make a fire in the small iron stove. She had learned how to make a fire in the mountains, and she laid the kindling and the small logs carefully. Soon, a small, cheerful fire was crackling in the stove, and a gentle warmth began to fill the small cabin. She was not hungry. She sat on the stool by the table and just listened to the silence. It was a different kind of silence from the mountains. The mountain silence was a silence of rock and wind, a vast, empty silence. The forest silence was a full silence. It was filled with the immense, quiet presence of millions of living things: the trees, the plants, the insects, the animals hidden in the darkness. She felt like she was sitting in a great, sleeping cathedral. She felt a sense of peace she had never known. It was not the peace of the sea or the stillness of the canals. It was a deeper peace, a peace that came from feeling like a small, safe part of a huge, ancient, living world. For the next few days, Clara lived a simple life in her small cabin. She fell into a rhythm that was dictated by the light and the forest. She would wake up early when the first dim green light began to filter through the trees. She would make a fire in the stove and heat some water for tea. She would sit on the porch in the small wooden chair, sipping her tea and watching the forest wake up. She would see small brown birds flitting from branch to branch. She would see a squirrel chase another one up the trunk of a giant tree. The forest was full of quiet, constant movement. During the day, she would walk. She did not follow a specific path. She would just wander into the forest from her cabin. The forest floor was a soft carpet of leaves and moss. Walking was silent and easy. The forest was a maze of giant tree trunks. Sometimes she would get lost, but she was never afraid. She knew she could always find her way back by looking for the slightly brighter light of the clearing. The forest was a world of details. She learned to look closely. She would spend an hour just looking at a patch of moss on a fallen log. She saw the intricate, tiny green plants that made up the moss. She saw tiny, red-capped mushrooms, no bigger than her thumbnail, growing out of the moss. She saw a small, iridescent beetle crawling slowly through this miniature forest. The world was full of wonders. If you only took the time to look. She learned the different kinds of trees. She learned to tell an oak by its lobed leaves and its strong, spreading branches. She learned to recognize the smooth gray bark of a beech tree. She learned the way a birch tree's white bark peeled off in thin, papery strips. The people of the village lived in a way that was completely connected to the forest. She would see them walking quietly through the trees, gathering things in baskets. They were gathering mushrooms, berries, edible leaves. The forest provided them with everything they needed. She saw men who were wood carvers. They would sit on their porches with a piece of fallen wood, and with a small, sharp knife, they would carve beautiful, simple shapes: birds, animals, leaves. They were not making art to sell. They were just making beautiful things for their own quiet pleasure. She saw women weaving baskets from thin, flexible branches. Their hands moved with a slow, practiced skill. The village lived in a quiet, symbiotic relationship with the forest. They took only what they needed, and they did it with a sense of respect and gratitude. They were the forest's children. Clara began to understand the people's silence. Words were not very important here. In the city, people used words constantly to fill the silence, to prove they existed. Here, in the deep quiet of the forest, words seemed small and unnecessary. You did not need to talk about the beauty of a tree. You just had to look at it. You did not need to describe the peace of the forest. You just had to feel it. The people of Oak Haven communicated in other ways, with a shared silence, with a small nod, with a quiet smile. They understood each other without a lot of noise. Clara started to become more like them. She found she did not want to talk. She did not even think in words as much. Her mind became as quiet as her surroundings. She was not worried about the past or planning for the future. She was just here, now, in this moment, in this forest. But she had not yet found the tree from the postcard. She had seen many giant trees, many ancient oaks, but she had not found the one that felt like the one. She knew she would recognize it when she saw it. She was not searching for it frantically. She trusted that the forest would show it to her when she was ready. One afternoon, she went to visit the old woman in the apothecary shop. She did not go to ask a question. She just felt a pull to go there. The old woman was sitting in her rocking chair, just as she had been the first time. She opened her eyes as Clara entered. She just deigned for Clara to sit on a small wooden stool near the fireplace. Clara sat. They sat in silence for a long time. It was a comfortable, peaceful silence. The room was filled with the smell of herbs. Finally, the old woman spoke. "You are looking for the breathing tree," she said. It was not a question. It was a statement. Clara was not surprised that the old woman knew. She seemed to know everything. "Yes," Clara said softly, "the one on the postcard." The old woman nodded slowly. "The forest is alive," she said, her voice a dry whisper. "It breathes, slowly, but it breathes, and the great oak is its heart. It is where you can feel the breath most clearly." She gave Clara simple directions, not with a map or with street names. She told her to follow the path of the setting sun, to walk toward the place where the light was warmest in the late afternoon. She told her to listen for the sound of a particular bird, a bird with a song that sounded like falling water. She said that bird made its nest in the branches of the great oak. The next day, in the late afternoon, Clara set out. She followed the old woman's instructions. She walked away from the village into the forest, toward the west. The sun was getting lower, and the light that filtered through the trees was a warm, golden color. The shadows of the trees were long and deep. The forest was very quiet. She walked slowly, listening. For a long time, she heard nothing but the soft sound of her own footsteps on the fallen leaves. Then she heard it. A beautiful, clear, liquid sound. A bird song that trickled and flowed like a small waterfall. It was coming from somewhere ahead of her. She followed the sound. The song grew louder, clearer. She walked around a dense thicket of ferns, and then she saw it, and her breath caught in her throat. It was the tree, but the postcard, as beautiful as it was, had not done it justice. It was not just a tree. It was a cathedral. It was a world. The trunk was so massive that it would take 10 people holding hands to circle it. The bark was a landscape of deep crevasses and high ridges, covered in a tapestry of mosses and lichens of 100 different shades of green. The great branches, gnarled and thick as ancient serpents, spread out from the trunk, reaching up and out, creating a vast green roof over her head. The leaves, a deep dark green, rustled softly in a breeze. She could not feel on the ground. The sunlight came down through the leaves in shafts of golden light, making the air itself seem to glow. It was the most beautiful, most powerful, most alive thing Clara had ever seen. She walked slowly toward the tree, as if approaching a holy place. She came to the base of the massive trunk and stopped. She reached out her hand and placed it on the rough, warm bark. She could feel a faint vibration under her palm. A slow, deep, powerful hum. The life force of the tree. She stood there for a long time, her hand on the tree, just feeling its immense, quiet strength. Then she slid down to the ground, her back resting against the solid trunk. She pulled her knees up to her chest and wrapped her arms around them. She closed her eyes. The bird song was all around her, a constant, beautiful melody. She focused on her breathing, the slow, steady rhythm of the air going in and the air going out, in and out. She let go of all her thoughts. She just focused on the sensation of her own breath and the feeling of the solid, living tree against her back. After a while, a strange thing began to happen. Her own breathing seemed to slow down. The rhythm of it seemed to change. It felt like it was syncing up with something else, a much slower, much deeper rhythm. It was the hum she had felt in the tree trunk. It was the breath of the forest. In and out, a slow, ancient, powerful breath that had been happening for 1,000 years. She was not just breathing for herself anymore. She was breathing with the tree. She was breathing with the forest. The feeling was indescribable. It was a feeling of complete connection, of being a small, essential part of a vast, living organism. The boundaries of her own body seemed to dissolve. She was not Clara anymore. She was just a breath, a part of the forest's breath. She stayed there until the sun went down and the forest was filled with a deep, soft darkness. She did not feel the time pass. She was outside of time. When she finally opened her eyes, the world was dark and filled with the light of the stars, visible through the gaps in the canopy above. The feeling of deep peace and connection remained. It was a feeling she knew she would carry with her always. She had found the meaning of the word breath. It was not just about the air in her lungs. It was about the breath of life itself, the shared breath that connects all living things, the quiet, powerful, eternal rhythm of the world. She walked back to her small cabin through the dark, silent forest. She was not afraid. She felt completely safe, as if the forest itself was protecting her. She felt like she belonged here. The next morning, she knew it was time to move on. She had received the gift of this place, the gift of breath. It was time to continue her journey. She packed her bag and left the small cabin as she had found it. She walked through the sleeping village and stood on the wooden platform, waiting for the old, green train that would take her away, back out of the ancient, breathing heart of the forest. The old, green train arrived in the clearing with a soft hiss of steam, a quiet visitor in the great, silent forest. Clara was the only person waiting on the weathered wooden platform. She had left her small cabin just as the first dim light was filtering through the dense canopy of leaves, a time when the forest was at its most still and mysterious. The air was cool and heavy with the scent of damp earth and moss, a smell she had come to know as the forest's own breath. As she waited, she thought about the gift this place had given her. It was the feeling of connection, the understanding that all living things shared a single, slow, deep rhythm. It was a feeling she carried not in her mind, but in her body. Her own breathing felt slower, deeper, more deliberate. She felt calmer, more centered than she had ever been. The train journey out of the forest was the reverse of her journey in foot. It was a slow retreat from the deep, green twilight into the bright, open world. The train groaned and clanked its way along the narrow track, a small man-made thing moving through an ancient, natural world. Clara sat on the hard wooden bench and watched the endless procession of giant trees slide past her window. She was not sad to be leaving. The forest was not a place you could leave behind. She knew that the feeling of the breathing tree, the sense of its immense, quiet life, would stay with her always. The trees became smaller, more spaced out. And then, with a suddenness that was still surprising, the train burst out of the trees and into the full, bright light of the sun. The change was so abrupt, it made her blink. The world was wide and open and filled with light. The train left the great forest behind, a dark green line on the horizon that slowly shrank and then disappeared. The train was now traveling back through the flat, fertile lowlands, the world of green fields and slow-moving rivers. But soon, the landscape began to change again. This was a new part of the country, a part she had not seen before. The journey she was on now was the longest one yet. Her train ticket was for a destination far, far away. She knew this journey would take several days. She settled into her seat, ready for the slow transformation of the world outside her window. She took the wooden box from her bag. It felt warm and familiar in her hands. She opened it and took out the 5th postcard. She had been in wild places of water and rock and trees. This postcard showed a place that was completely different. The painting depicted a quiet courtyard at night. The courtyard was enclosed by simple, low walls made of a pale, sandy-colored earth. In the center of the courtyard was a small, round stone fountain. A thin stream of clear water trickled from the top of the fountain into a shallow basin. The most striking part of the painting was the sky. It was a deep, dark, velvet black, and it was filled with a breathtaking multitude of stars. They were not just a few scattered points of light. They were a thick, dense river of light, a cloud of brilliant white dots that stretched from one side of the painting to the other. The painting was filled with a sense of deep peace, of cool water in a dry place, of immense silent space. She turned the postcard over. There was the train ticket for a long and complicated journey, and beneath it, the single, simple word, thirst. Thirst, the word was a powerful one. It was a primal need, a deep ache for something essential. Looking at the painting of the fountain, she understood the thirst for water. But looking at the painting of the incredible night sky, she felt that the word might mean something more. A thirst for wonder, perhaps a thirst for a sight so beautiful it could quench a different kind of dryness, a dryness of the soul. She put the postcard on the small wooden ledge of the window, propping it up so she could look at it. It was her guide for this next long part of her journey. The train traveled for the rest of the day through the green lowlands, but as the afternoon wore on, a subtle change began. The green of the fields became less vibrant, which was a paler, more sun-bleached green. The trees were fewer, and they were smaller, with thinner leaves. The rivers the train crossed became narrower, the water moving more slowly. The land was becoming drier. The next morning, when she woke up in her seat after a restless night of sleep, the change was dramatic. The green was gone. The world outside her window was a vast, flat plain of dry yellow grass. The sky was a pale, hazy blue. The sun was a white, hot circle in the sky. The air that came through the open window was no longer soft and humid. It was hot and dry. It felt different on her skin, different in her lungs. The train was traveling for hours through this immense, empty landscape. There were no towns, no farms, no people, just the endless, flat, yellow plain. The heat grew more intense as the day went on. The metal of the train carriage became hot to the touch. The other passengers in the carriage were quiet, fanning themselves with newspapers or sleeping in the stifling heat. By the third day, the landscape had changed again. The dry yellow grass had given way to a world of red earth. The ground was a deep, rusty red, and it was cracked and dry. Strange, twisted, low-lying bushes with small gray leaves were the only things that grew here. The train moved more slowly, as if the heat was making it tired. The clatter of the wheels was a slow, lazy rhythm. The world outside looked like another planet. The air was filled with a fine, red dust that coated everything in the carriage with a thin film. Clara felt a constant, nagging thirst. She had a bottle of water with her, and she took small sips, making it last. The word on the postcard was becoming a real, physical feeling. She understood the simple, powerful meaning of thirst in a way she never had before. Her body ached for water. Late on the third day, she saw the first signs of the desert. The red earth began to be mixed with patches of pale, golden sand. The patches grew larger and larger until the red earth was gone completely. The train was now moving through a world of pure sand. It was not a flat landscape. The wind had shaped the sand into huge, rolling hills called dunes. They were beautiful, elegant shapes, like giant, soft waves frozen in time. The color of the sand was a pale, golden yellow, and in the late afternoon sun, it glowed with a warm, soft light. There was no sign of life here at all. No plants, no animals, just the sand and the wind and the sun. The train itself was different now. The old wooden train from the forest had been changed at a small, dusty station in the middle of the plains. This train was built for the desert. The windows did not open fully. They had special screens on them to keep out the blowing sand. The carriages were painted a pale, sandy color to reflect the heat. It was a train that was adapted to this harsh, beautiful environment. That night, Clara could not sleep. She sat by the window and looked out at the desert. The moon was a thin, silver crescent, and it cast a pale, ghostly light on the sand dunes. The world was a silent, empty landscape of silver and black. The train moved through the night like a small, lonely ship on a vast, sandy ocean. The silence was absolute. It was a silence even deeper than the forest or the mountains. It was the silence of emptiness. But it was not a frightening emptiness. It was a peaceful emptiness, a clean emptiness, a place where the mind could become as clear and empty as the landscape. She thought about the postcard, the courtyard at night, the stars. She looked up at the sky through the train window. There were stars, bright and clear in the dry air, but it was nothing like the sky in the painting. The real desert sky, she thought, must be something you could only see when you were perfectly still, away from the movement and the small lights of the train. On the fourth day, the train finally began to slow down. The long journey was coming to an end. In the far distance, through the hazy, shimmering heat, she could see a small cluster of shapes on the horizon. As the train got closer, she saw that it was a town, a small town, rising up from the endless sand. The train pulled into a station. It was not a grand station like in Viridia, or a simple wooden platform like in the forest. The station was a low, simple building made of baked earth, the same color as the sand. A single sun-bleached wooden sign had a name painted on it in faded black letters, Amber Rest. The name was perfect. It sounded like a place of refuge, a place to rest from the harshness of the desert. Clara stepped off the train and onto the platform. The heat hit her like a physical blow. It was an intense, dry, baking heat that seemed to suck the moisture right out of her body. The sun was a blinding white glare in the sky. The air she breathed was hot, like air from an oven. She immediately felt the deep, aching thirst return, stronger than ever. The town of Amber Rest was a collection of low, flat-roofed buildings. They were all made of the same sun-baked clay, a pale, sandy color that made them almost invisible against the desert landscape. The streets were narrow, unpaved alleys of soft sand. The town was designed to fight the sun. The narrow streets created deep shadows, offering some escape from the relentless glare. The thick clay walls of the houses kept the interiors cool. The town was incredibly quiet. It was the middle of the day, the hottest part. The town was sleeping. No one was on the streets. The doors were closed. The windows were covered with wooden shutters. The only sound was the faint, low whistle of the wind as it moved through the narrow alleyways, stirring up small eddies of sand. Clara knew she needed to find shelter from the sun, and she needed water. She picked up her bag and walked into the maze of silent, sandy streets. The heat was disorienting. The glare from the sand made it hard to see. She walked slowly, staying in the narrow strips of shadow as much as possible. She felt weak and dizzy. She turned a corner into a slightly wider alley, and she saw a sign. A simple wooden board with a picture of a water jug painted on it. It was hanging above a large, dark wooden door. It was a guest house. Hope surged through her. She walked to the door and pushed it open. It was not locked. She stepped inside into a world of cool, dim shadow. The change from the outside was so extreme it made her gasp. The air inside was cool and still. The light was soft and gentle. It took her eyes a moment to adjust. She was standing in a small entryway. In front of her was an open archway, and through it she could see a courtyard. The guest house was built around this central courtyard. The courtyard was a small green oasis in the middle of the dry, sandy town. There were plants growing in large clay pots, green leafy plants with large waxy leaves. A single, slender palm tree grew in one corner, its fronds providing a dappled shade. And the most beautiful sight of all was the water. A small, narrow channel of stone had been cut into the floor of the courtyard, and a thin stream of clear, clean water flowed through it. The sound of the trickling water was the most beautiful music she had ever heard. It was a sound of life, a promise of relief. A woman came out of a doorway on the other side of the courtyard. She was tall and slender, dressed in a long, simple robe of a deep blue color. Her head was covered with a matching blue scarf. Her face was calm and serene. "Welcome," she said. Her voice was as soft and cool as the courtyard. "You look tired and thirsty." "Yes," Clara said. Her own voice was a dry croak. The woman led her to a stone bench in the shade of the palm tree. She disappeared into a room and came back with a clay mug filled with water. She handed it to Clara. Clara took the mug. Her hands were trembling. The water was cool. She drank it slowly, savoring every drop. It was the best water she had ever tasted. It was cool and clean and pure. It felt like it was bringing her back to life, quenching a thirst that was days old. When she had finished, the woman took the mug and filled it again. Clara drank the second mug just as slowly. The feeling of deep, aching thirst began to subside, replaced by a feeling of profound gratitude. "Thank you," she said. The woman simply smiled. "You need a room," she said. "Come." She led Clara to a small room on the ground floor, opening off the courtyard. The room was simple and beautiful. The walls were thick, smooth clay, painted white. The floor was made of cool, dark stone. There was a low bed with a thin mattress and a single light cotton sheet. A small, low wooden table stood in the corner. The only window was a small, high opening covered with a carved wooden screen, which let in a soft, patterned light but kept out the heat. The room was cool and dark and silent. It was a perfect sanctuary. Clara knew she would stay here. She spent the rest of the day in her cool, dark room, resting. She slept for a few hours, a deep, restorative sleep. When she woke up, the fierce heat of the day had begun to lessen. The light coming through the wooden screen was a softer, more golden color. She went out into the courtyard. The woman was there, watering her plants. Clara learned that her name was Zara. She was the owner of the guest house. They talked for a while. Zara told her about life in the desert. She explained that the people of Amber Rest lived their lives in reverse. They rested and slept during the intense heat of the day. They came out in the evenings, when the air cooled down. The night was the time for socializing, for eating, for living. The day was for surviving. Clara understood. This was a place where life was shaped completely by the sun and the lack of water. As evening fell, the town began to wake up. Clara heard the sound of doors opening, of voices in the sandy streets. She went out to explore. The town was transformed. The air was still warm, but it was a pleasant, gentle warmth. A soft breeze was blowing. The sky was a deep, dark purple. The narrow streets were now filled with people. They were dressed in long, flowing robes of dark blue and white. They walked slowly, gracefully. They gathered in small, open squares, sitting on woven rugs laid out on the sand. They talked in low, melodious voices. Children ran and played in the soft sand, their laughter echoing in the quiet air. Small lamps, fueled by oil, were lit, casting a warm, flickering golden light on the pale clay walls. The town was alive with a quiet, gentle energy. Clara wandered through the town for hours. She was an observer, a silent witness to this different way of life. No one paid much attention to her. She was a stranger, but she was not made to feel unwelcome. She was simply allowed to be there. She found a small open-air market where people were selling dates and figs and nuts. She bought some sweet, sticky dates and ate them as she walked. She saw a man telling a story to a group of children, his hands moving expressively in the lamplight. She saw women sitting together, weaving intricate patterns into colorful rugs. It was a life of simplicity, of community, of quiet artistry. Late that night, she returned to the guest house. Zara was sitting in the courtyard, looking up at the sky. She motioned for Clara to join her. Clara sat on the stone bench. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the trickle of the water in the small channel. Then Zara said, "You are looking for something." It was not a question. "Yes," Clara said, "a place from a picture." She took out the postcard and showed it to Zara in the dim light from the guest house rooms. Zara looked at the painting of the courtyard with the fountain and the stars. She smiled a slow, knowing smile. "That is the courtyard of the storyteller," she said. "It is in the oldest part of the town. I will show you tomorrow night." The next night, after the sun had set and the town had come alive, Zara led Clara through the maze of sandy streets. They walked to a part of the town Clara had not yet seen. The alleys here were even narrower, the houses older and more crooked. They came to a large open square. The square was filled with people, all sitting on the ground, all facing one direction. At the far end of the square, there was an old man sitting on a large, intricately woven rug. He was the storyteller Zara had told her about. Zara led her around the edge of the crowd to a low archway in the wall behind the storyteller. They stepped through the archway, and Clara gasped. She was standing in the courtyard from her postcard. It was exactly the same. The low walls of pale earth, the small round stone fountain in the center, the thin stream of clear water trickling down. The courtyard was empty and silent, a quiet space hidden away behind the busy square. Clara walked to the fountain. She dipped her hand in the cool, clean water of the basin. It felt real. It was real. She had found it. She had found the place of thirst and water. She turned to thank Zara, but Zara was gone. She had left Clara alone in this special place. Clara sat down on the low stone edge of the fountain. She looked at the water. She listened to its soft, trickling sound. And then she looked up. And the sight that met her eyes was so beautiful, so overwhelming, that it brought tears to her eyes. The sky, with no city lights, no haze, no pollution. The desert sky was a revelation. It was not just black with a few stars. It was a vast, deep, velvet dome, and it was so thick with stars that it seemed more white than black. There were millions of them, billions of them, tiny, sharp points of brilliant white light. And across the very center of the sky was a huge, milky, glowing river of stars. The Milky Way. She had seen pictures of it, but the reality was so much more powerful, so much more profound. It was a sight of such immense, silent, majestic beauty that it made her feel incredibly small and incredibly connected at the same time. She understood the postcard completely now. The thirst was for water, yes, but it was also for this sight, for this feeling of pure, unadulterated wonder, a thirst for the universe itself. She sat by the fountain for hours, her head tilted back, just looking at the sky. She felt like she could drink the starlight. The beauty of it filled her up, quenching a thirst she had not even known she had, a thirst for magic, a thirst for a world that was bigger and more mysterious than she could ever have imagined. She stayed there until the first hint of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, and the river of stars began to fade. She knew her journey was nearing its end. The postcards had led her to the sea, the mountains, the canals, the forest, and now the desert. Each place had given her a gift. Each word had unlocked a secret. She wondered what the final postcard, the final place, would hold. Chapter 10. Clara spent her first full day in amber rest in a state of cool, dark hibernation. Her room in Zara's guest house was a sanctuary, a cave of peace dug out of the heart of the heat. The thick clay walls held the coolness of the previous night, and the small high window with its carved wooden screen let in only a dim, patterned light. It was a light that was soft on the eyes, a light that encouraged rest. Outside, she knew the sun was a white, furious fire in the sky. She knew the heat was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered the town into silence and stillness. But inside her room, the world was cool and quiet. The only sound was the distant, constant, gentle trickle of the water in the courtyard channel. It was a sound that spoke of life, survival, of coolness in a world of heat. It was the most peaceful sound she had ever heard. She did not feel bored or restless. She felt a deep need for this stillness. Her long journey through the heat had tired her in a way she had not understood until now. She lay on the low, simple bed, a thin cotton sheet covering her. She dozed, she woke, she listened to the water. The day passed in a slow, dreamlike rhythm. She felt her body slowly rehydrating, her mind slowly unwinding. This was a place of healing. It was a place that understood the importance of rest, of retreat, of conserving one's energy. The desert taught its own lessons, and the first lesson was stillness. As the day began to fade, she could feel a change. The air in her room, which had been cool, now felt just slightly less cool. This meant the air outside was beginning to lose its fierce heat. The quality of the light filtering through the wooden screen changed, shifting from a soft white to a warm, golden honey color. The town was beginning to stir. She heard the sound of a distant door opening, the soft murmur of a voice. The desert night was about to begin. She got up from the bed. She felt rested, renewed. She went out into the courtyard. The air here was still warm, but it was a pleasant, breathable warmth now. The stone floor was no longer hot to the touch. Zara was in the courtyard, her tall, graceful figure moving slowly as she tended to her plants. She was wiping dust from the large, waxy leaves with a soft, damp cloth. She looked up and smiled at Clara. It was a smile of welcome, of understanding. Zara did not ask Clara how she had slept or what she planned to do. She simply went to a small alcove and brought back a tray. On the tray was a small bowl of thick, sweet yogurt, a handful of dark, sticky dates, and a pile of thin, warm, flat bread. She placed it on a low table next to the stone bench where Clara had sat before. It was a simple, perfect meal. Clara sat and ate slowly. The cool yogurt, the intense sweetness of the dates, the simple, earthy taste of the bread. The food tasted incredibly good. It was food that was meant for this climate, for this way of life. It was nourishing and simple. After she ate, she stepped out of the guest house and into the sandy streets of Amber Rest. The town was transformed. The silent, sleeping town of midday was gone. The narrow streets were now filled with a quiet, gentle life. People were emerging from their cool, dark houses. They were dressed in long, loose robes of dark blues and whites and grays, clothes that were both modest and practical, allowing the air to move around their bodies. They moved with a slow, unhurried grace. No one rushed. There was nowhere to rush to. The night was long and the air was cool. Children, who had been hidden away from the sun all day, now played in the soft sand of the streets. Their laughter was a soft, happy sound that echoed gently off the clay walls. Small flickering oil lamps had been lit and placed in niches in the walls of the houses, casting a warm, dancing golden light and creating deep, soft shadows. The whole town glowed with a gentle, ancient light. Clara began to walk. She had no destination. She just wanted to be a part of this quiet, nightly awakening. She walked through the maze of narrow streets, her feet sinking slightly into the soft sand with each step. The air was filled with a mix of smells, the faint, oily scent of the burning lamps, the sweet, rich smell of spices from an open doorway, the clean, dry, dusty smell of the desert itself. She found herself in a small, open square. Many people were gathered here. They were sitting on colorful woven rugs laid out directly on the sand. In the center of the square, a man was selling hot, sweet tea from a large, ornate silver pot, pouring it from a great height into small, delicate glasses. The sound of the tea pouring was a thin, musical stream in the quiet air. Clara bought a glass. The tea was incredibly sweet and hot, and was flavored with a sharp, fresh mint. She stood at the edge of the square, sipping the hot tea, watching the quiet social life of the town. People talked in low, calm voices. They shared food. They watched their children play. It was a life of simple, deep community. She felt completely invisible, but in a good way. She was an observer, a ghost, and her presence did not disturb the scene. She was allowed to witness this life without being a part of it. After she finished her tea, she continued her walk. She wandered down an alley and found a small market. Stalls were set up, lit by single oil lamps. Merchants sat quietly behind their goods. There were piles of nuts and dried fruits. There were sacks of fragrant spices, their rich, earthy colors glowing in the lamplight. There were stacks of beautiful handmade clay pots. Clara bought a small bag of roasted almonds and ate them as she walked. They were warm and salty, and the simple taste was a deep pleasure. For several nights, this became her routine. She would rest during the day in her cool, quiet room. In the evening, she would emerge into the living town. She would walk, explore, observe. She felt no need to search for the courtyard on her postcard yet. She just wanted to absorb the rhythm of this place. She was learning the desert's other lessons, the lesson of community, the lesson of finding joy in simple things, a glass of tea, a sweet date, a shared smile, the lesson of the night. In her own world, the night was a time for ending the day, for going inside, for sleeping. Here, the night was the day. It was the time for living. It was a complete reversal of everything she had known. One evening, sitting in the guest house courtyard with Zara, she finally felt ready. She had been in amber rest for almost a week. She felt she understood the place a little better. She took the postcard from the box in her room and brought it out to the courtyard. The night was dark, and the sky above the small opening of the courtyard was filled with brilliant stars. She handed the postcard to Zara. Zara held it close to the light of a small lamp on the table. She looked at the painting for a long time. She looked at the fountain, and she looked at the river of stars in the painted sky. A slow, knowing smile spread across her serene face. "Ah," she said, her voice a soft whisper, "the place where the sky speaks." She did not ask Clara why she had the postcard or what she was doing. She seemed to understand that it was a personal quest. "It is a special place," Zara said. "Not many people go there. It is a place for listening." She looked at Clara with her dark, calm eyes. "Are you ready to listen?" "Yes," Clara said. "I think I am." "Then tomorrow night, I will take you," Zara said. She handed the postcard back to Clara. "Rest well. The journey is not far, but you must be quiet inside yourself to truly arrive." The next evening, as the town began to stir, Zara was waiting for Clara by the guest house door. They walked out into the sandy streets together. Zara led the way. She moved with a silent, graceful purpose. She navigated the maze of streets with an easy familiarity, turning down narrow alleys and crossing small, quiet squares that Clara had never seen before. They walked away from the more populated parts of the town, toward the older, quieter edges. The houses here were more weathered, the clay walls crumbling in places. There were fewer lamps. This was the main square of the town, a place Clara had seen before. It was filled with people, all sitting on the ground, listening to an old man with a long white beard who was telling a story. His voice was a rhythmic, melodic chant. Zara did not stop. She led Clara along the edge of the large crowd to the back of the square. In the far wall, there was a low, dark archway that Clara had never noticed before. It was almost completely hidden in shadow. Zara paused at the archway and turned to Clara. "I will leave you here," she said softly. "This is a place you must enter alone." She placed a gentle hand on Clara's shoulder for a moment. It was a gesture of blessing, of sending her on her way. Then she turned and melted back into the shadows of the square. Clara was alone. She stood before the dark archway. She could hear the voice of the storyteller from the square behind her, a faint musical murmur. In front of her was silence. She took a deep breath of the warm, dry night air and stepped through the arch. She was in a courtyard. It was small and enclosed, and the noise from the square was instantly gone. It was a place of profound silence, and it was the place from her postcard. Everything was exactly the same. The low walls made of pale, sandy-colored clay. The round stone fountain in the center. She walked slowly toward the fountain. Her footsteps made no sound in the soft sand that covered the ground. She reached the fountain and looked down into the basin. A thin, steady stream of water trickled from a small opening at the top, a silent, continuous offering. The water in the basin was clear and still. She knelt down and dipped her fingers into the water. It was incredibly cool. It was a miracle, this constant flow of cool, clean water in the heart of the vast, dry desert. She cupped her hands and brought some of the water to her lips. It was sweet and pure. It tasted of stone and deep earth and life. It was a taste that quenched the deepest thirst. She sat down on the low, smooth stone rim of the fountain. She felt a sense of arrival, a feeling that this was the place she had been traveling toward for so long, the place of thirst. She had felt thirst in her body on the long train journey, but she knew the thirst the postcard spoke of was something more. She sat for a long time just listening to the soft, trickling sound of the water. It was the only sound in the universe. It was a sound that was both small and immense. The sound of life itself. And then she remembered the other part of the painting. She leaned back, resting her head against the cool stone of the fountain, and looked up. The sight that met her eyes made her stop breathing. The sky. The sky above the small courtyard was a perfect dark square, framed by the top of the walls, and that square of sky was not black. It was a solid, dense, blazing sheet of white light. It was a field of diamonds scattered on black velvet. There were millions of them, billions, more stars than she had ever imagined could exist. They were so bright, so close, they seemed to be alive. They pulsed with a silent, brilliant energy. And across the middle of the sky, the great milky river of the Milky Way flowed, a luminous cloud of even more stars, so dense they merged into a single glowing band. It was not a distant, cold sight. It was a presence. It was a living, breathing, overwhelming beauty. It was a beauty so immense it was almost frightening. It was a beauty that shattered every idea she had ever had about the world, about the sky, about her own small place in the universe. Tears began to stream down her face. They were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, overwhelming awe. This was the thirst. This was what her soul had been dry for. This sight, this feeling, this absolute heart-stopping wonder. She felt as if the top of her head had been opened up and the universe was pouring in. She stayed there all night. She did not move from her spot on the edge of the fountain. She just sat and looked up. The sky was not static. It was moving. The whole vast, glittering dome of stars was slowly, imperceptibly turning above her. She saw constellations she had only ever seen in books, but here they were real, they were brilliant. She saw stars that were blue and stars that were red. She saw shooting stars, tiny, fleeting streaks of light that flashed across the sky and were gone in an instant. It was a silent, cosmic ballet, and she was the sole audience. She thought about her journey. She thought about her small, quiet life in the library, a life lived under a sky that was pale and empty, washed out by the lights of the city. She had not even known she was thirsty for this. Her great-aunt had known. Her great-aunt had sent her here, to this specific spot on Earth, to see this, to have her soul filled to overflowing. It was the greatest gift she had ever received. As the night went on, a deep peace settled over her. The overwhelming awe softened into a quiet, profound sense of connection. She was a tiny, tiny speck of life, sitting on a small planet, looking out at an infinite universe, but she was not separate from it. The same stuff that made the stars, the dust, the light, the energy, was also in her. She was part of this great, beautiful, mysterious whole. The feeling was a deep, quiet joy. It was a joy that did not need words. It was a joy that simply was. Slowly, slowly, the deepest black of the sky began to soften. A faint pale light began to grow on the eastern horizon. The stars began to fade. The brilliant river of the Milky Way grew dimmer, more transparent. The great show was coming to an end. The dawn was coming. Clara watched as the last, brightest stars held on, and then they too disappeared, washed away by the growing light. The sky turned from deep indigo to purple, then to pink, then to a pale, clear blue. A new day had begun. She felt a sense of deep completion. She had drunk the water from the fountain. She had drunk the light of the stars. Her thirst was quenched. She knew, with a certainty that came from deep within her, that this was the last major stop on her journey. She stood up. Her body was stiff from sitting all night, but she felt light, renewed. She took one last look at the small, peaceful courtyard. She turned and walked back through the archway. The town was silent again, sleeping after its night of life. She walked through the empty, sandy streets back to the guest house. The sun was rising, and the heat of the new day was already beginning to build. She went back to her cool, dark room and took out the wooden box. There was only one postcard left. She had saved it for last, without even looking at it. Now she took it out. It was very different from all the others. The others had shown grand, beautiful, dramatic places. The lighthouse on the cliff, the bridge in the mountains, the yellow house on the canal, the giant tree, the courtyard of stars. This last postcard was a painting of something very simple. It was a small, plain house. It was a cottage made of whitewashed stone with a dark slate roof. It had a simple green door and 2 small windows. A little bit of smoke was coming from its single chimney. A small, simple garden was next to the house with a few rows of vegetables. The house was not on a cliff, or in the mountains, or in a city. It was just sitting in a gentle, green field. It was a picture of a home. A simple, quiet, peaceful home. Clara turned the postcard over. There was the final train ticket, and below it, the final word. The word was home, and in that moment, Clara understood. The journey had not been about endless travel. It had been about finding the way back, not to her old apartment, but to a new place, a place of her own, a place to be still. The journey was almost over. It was time to go home.